and then my phone died.
Your phone died?
Yeah, always.
That's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is the Harry Potter password?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Cauda Draconis or Caput Draconis?
You're asking the wrong person.
But you're British.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Harry's like, of your people.
Our proudest son. Yeah.
Caput Draconis.
Well, she evidently decided she was going to yank a bunch of stuff from Geomancy, given that Dumbledore and Hagrid are Albus and Rubeus, respectively. So she clearly, cast her eye over something at some point.
They were Latin words before that they were figure names, too.
Mm-hmm.
He is an old man and a West Country, ruddy-faced...
The red. Yeah.
Collector of... Mm-hmm. This is a very long intro. All right, so, hi.
Hello.
Welcome to Radio Free Golgotha. This is, I believe, episode 9.
Oh, nice.
This is our 9th episode, sort of, somewhere, something. It is for the Feast of St. Martha, July 29th. And today our topics shall include...
Martha, brought to you by the stone, Hagstone.
Yeah, Adderstone, Hagstone. The herb... It's British. Yeah, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm Harry all over again. All right.
Harry.
Tarragon. So
that is how we say it. Yeah.
Tarragon. Mm-hmm. All right. So Tarragon, the demon Klepoth. Klepoth? Do you aspirate?
I dipsong it. Yeah. Klepoth.
And the correspondent Eshu, which is Pomba Gira, the female Eshu, who is legion unto herself. Yay! Mm-hmm. And we're going to discuss household magic, such as it is, and... we're also going to do... the major arcana will be the Tower, and our dead magician is Cassandra. Mm-hmm. Who said Cassandra here? I don't know. You guys like that That asshole. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What was it? Twat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
IPA says that twat is an acceptable pronunciation.
To whom?
British people. It was 40-60. So... oppress the underdog there. And sorry, our geomantic figure is Caput Draconis, and the corresponding Odu is Osa.
Well, this is an interesting point, I think. I like what Wim van Binsbergen has to say about the idea of geomantic being a valid way of approaching a number of binary figured divination systems. He talks about the I Ching and Ifa and other related traditions, oracles, as being of the geomantic family of divination systems, and it removes the idea that geomancy is just the European thing, or occasionally we might say Islamic geomancy, and rather. So I've been trying to reorient talking about, unless it's obvious by context, but at least the first time I raise it, trying to talk about Renaissance or Renaissance European geomancy. Mm-hmm. It's not the only one, but it is a geomancy. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting balance with many things that we talk about, right? That we're interested in. Mm-hmm. The balance between using comparisons with other things to make sure that it is not viewed as monolithic and megalithic, right? But also the danger in that in using things outside of a system to justify its existence, which, depending on which side of the coin you're on, politics being what they are, is when you are seeking to validate certain religious or spiritual traditions as valid to the exoteric community, basically putting on par with psychology or something like that, then we run into a danger point which is noble savagery and exoticism, right. Which also means that we can then use all language as metaphor, but then you're also able to use things that have nothing to do with the thing to justify your scant. That's not what I mean. Your scant. What am I trying to say? Oh my god. Your skewed view on something that is not scant at all. I don't know where I was trying to say something in some language, but it's a good thing to consider what that balance is, I think. Yeah. So again, Feast of St. Martha, Klepoth, Pomba Gira, Tarragon, Hagstones, household magic, Caput Draconis doesn't scare me. Osa does scare me. The Tower and Cassandra. Mm-hmm. Cassie.
but not Opia. So, okay, Martha?
Martha.
Yeah.
So we run down as we normally do when we're, doing our bits of research and pondering and putting things together. So I went through the Golden Legend as I usually do, as these things normally start. And there's a couple lines that stood out at me as really interesting. Obviously, there's the great description of the dragon, mm-hmm. the beast, the river beast, mm-hmm. Occasionally.
Part fish or part turtle. I mean, it says part fish, I think, right? And then it's often interpreted as part Chelonian.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really?
Yeah. It's often depicted as like an ankylosaurus type of creature.
Yeah.
Because fish walking on land confuses people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So half serpent, half fish is like, what is that? Is it a giant eel? But anyway.
Yeah. But one of the things that struck me before we got to, that stuff, or her, raising the dead or other bits and pieces, was just, there's a throwaway line where it says, "It is nowhere read that Martha had ever any husband nor fellowship of man, but she as a noble hostess ministered and served our Lord." And I like this idea because it doesn't feel like it's expressly saying that she's virginal and chaste, but it also is I don't know, it feels like it's trying to
get... Because she's a spinster. This is like a spinster archetype.
Right.
Like, this is, in many ways, I mean, not to interject right away, but...
No.
I mean, like, okay, so... Martha. Martha is, by tradition, the sister of Mary and Lazarus, and there is a lot of contention throughout history as to whether that Mary is Mary Magdalene or not.
Yeah.
So, by popular folk imagination, absolutely, that is the Trinity, friends of Jesus, and there's a lot of similarity between Mary Magdalene and Martha's story in general. And there's some really interesting research coming out of a grad student at Harvard right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But the idea that there is a woman who was doing household chores, and then there was Mary, her sister, who was listening to Jesus, and Mary is concerned the whole time with keeping up the house chores. And there's this relationship with Jesus there. There's also her presence at Lazarus's resurrection, which is, the significance of that is not just Lazarus coming back from the dead, which is a miracle performed by Jesus, but it happens right before the Passion Week. Lazarus Saturday is the last Saturday before, the last day of Lent, really, because it's right before Palm Sunday.
And how officially biblical is it that Lazarus is her brother?
Lazarus and Martha are always listed.
Yeah.
The difference is there's some speculation and research to support it by a woman, Elizabeth Schrader, out of a doctoral candidate and she published an article in the Harvard Theological Review that was saying that 1 out of 5 ancient Greek documents, the oldest ones, and 1 out of 3 Latin documents show that there was a conflation between Mary and Martha, and that they may have originally been the same person, because the earliest one she can find in Greek on a papyrus from the 2nd century crosses out Maria, changes the iota to a th. So it is evident that there was somebody trying to change the story of Maria to be about Martha. And biblically, I think it's in John, she points out that only one is mentioned as a sister of Lazarus at a time. They are, at other times, all listed together, but in earliest depictions, including 3rd century sarcophagi and reliquaries, it's one woman standing at the resurrection of Lazarus, and 2 came in much later. So there's evidence to support that Mary, and if it was Mary Magdalene and Martha are the same person originally, and they got divided into sisters. Mythologically, this happens all the time,
right?
Which is interesting because I grew up thinking of them as different powers and different regencies. They both are incredibly necromantic, meditating with skulls and dragons and things like that, and raising the dead. But I find that there is evidence to support that. We don't know what the aim of that was. Was it correcting the story and saying no, that's not it. It was Martha that was there, and somebody did it, or is it like, this Mary person is really powerful because we keep on describing just Mary. Yeah. There's Mary, mother of Salome, Mary, mother of the sons of Zabdi, right. Mary, mother of Jesus, Mary the Magdalene. So there's just all these Marys that are getting conflated, and maybe it's a little bit like, let's start organizing things differently.
Right, give them a slightly different name.
Yeah,
one that can then fit in with that can be Tibexed in.
Mm-hmm. But to go back to Golden Legend's story and what is popularly said is that, or at least playing off Golden Legend, because Lazarus, Mary Magdalene, and Martha are always tied together. And if you're talking French lore, which is important for Martha, Sarah Kali, the assistant, the Sarah the Egyptian, is with them. So they are put in a boat without sails from the Holy Land and set adrift. Wow, avast, me hearties, out into the waters. And it was, if you want to tie it into, sorry, I have a rat who's drinking in the background, and he doesn't understand the need to stay quiet during recording sessions. Yes, that's a very, very good rat. Thank you. Okay, so in the legend that includes Saint Sarah is that she was the handmaiden to the three Marys, which includes Martha as one of the Marys, and that she prays to calm the storm. And it all, she uncovers her head, which is bold, and vows never to cover her head again.
Right. Hence the scarf stuff with her statue.
So the folk magic of almost torturing her by putting a head covering back on her, and when she grants your request, undoing it. But they end up in France at Marie de la Mer, which is the folk is a cathedral, which is the only known real site of worship of Saint Sarah, and it is the Rom Saint, where there's a festival every 24th, 25th of May. That said, Martha lands with her sister and her brother. And there's all these different holy sites around France to Mary Magdalene, and Martha is basically tied to the Pyrenees, like this area on either side of it, very, very strongly. And there's this damn Tarrasque that's wandering around that they think came from Galicia originally. They blame it on some northern dragon.
Oh yeah,
that's coming down to piss them off.
Coming over here.
Yeah, stupid foreigners. Totally the attitude. And Martha does a unique thing, and I think it's using holy water especially, which is why she carries the holy water aspergillum with her, which is sometimes a censer, but is oftentimes actually the holy water canister.
The censer seems more popular in like modern iconography.
Yes, and I think honestly it's a misreading of her carrying a bucket anyway. But she basically baptizes, not chases away, because the Tarrasque becomes converted. The Tarrasque is not subdued and killed. The Tarrasque follows her around.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So the Tarrasque is no longer an agent of chaos and the devil. He's now working for Martha, which brings up totally amazing parallels within Tibetan Buddhism and going in and being like, cannibalistic deity, let's just sit in the temple, and when I die, then I'll come back in a reincarnated form and convert the deity again and be like, do you know why you should accept the Dharma? Here's why. And I'll see you in 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I like this idea that Martha converts and embraces through love and the sacrament of baptism, not expels.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I mean, the account in the Golden Legend is that she cast on him holy water and showed to him the cross as well, whether the sign of the cross, which feels kind of Justinery, but it's not unique to her, obviously. But then, no, they say that, she bound him with her own girdle, which I like as well. The use of the girdle feels very strength card as well. But then the beast is slain with spears and glaives of the people. So I like the idea that the dragon is brought on side more.
Yeah,
makes
the lore is so strange and how it goes all over the place, because there's the Mondragon references in Spain of just the different feasts and it's always associated with the Tarrasque. And this beast that was either slain or continues to live. What is the Museum of Witchcraft quote? And it still goes on.
Still goes on today.
Yes. But the idea that the Tarrasque is able to come out at any time and hello.
Right, and I like the kind of chimeric appearance of it as well. It feels a little alchemical, a little, dare I say, sort of grimoire. The idea of this. The account I found of a great dragon, half beast and half fish, greater than an ox, longer than a horse, having teeth sharp as a sword, and horned on either side, head like a lion, tail like a serpent, and defended him with 2 wings on either side. And there's various other stuff that then sounds kind of odd as well about And when he is pursued, he casts out his belly behind his ordure, the space of an acre of land to them that follow him, and is as bright as glass, and what it touches, it burneth as fire. So you've got this like water beast, also fiery, a mixture of all these different animals, which obviously brings up that thing that I think we've talked about before with the idea of, from a strictly natural history point of view, of working out what a thing is by what it looks like. Of assembling it from other things. Oh, it's like this, but it has the head of this. But then also, I don't know. It felt if the purpose is overcoming it or converting it in some way, that already feels not just soteriological but somewhat alchemical in terms of this thing that behaves in odd ways and burns things up and is remedied, comes from water and remedies back to water, and these kinds of principles.
I like the parallel with that too, of these are people by tradition that knew Jesus, and by modern tradition you have the traditions of the Magdalene being the wife of Jesus. Well, it seems to be a fairly modern interpretation. But it's great. I think that, saints, like everything, should serve the value centers of what's needed, and if it's to counteract the extreme patriarchal oppression of that it's been taken to, then that's good too. It shows that the saints are actually alive, even if they dismantle the church itself, especially if they dismantle the church itself. But that their take on conversion here, all the myths surrounding that trinity of people, and even Surat Kali, is not about eliminating through the sword. It's not the Pauline conversion of go in and decimate a people and replace it with Christianity. It's like, let me show you why this is important. Let me actually talk to you about Jesus as a person, as a messenger, as light, and love. And Martha's such an interesting action because there's lore with her that turns into, because Martha seems to mean, I think it means mistress in Aramaic, like the opposition of master, not the third, not the interlocutor, but the interloper. My vocabulary is all over the place. Yes,
in a dialogue of lust.
Yes, exactly. All things with the tongue. But that Martha herself becomes a figure that, when you go into a lot of right-handed, left-handed lore, or let's just talk about good and bad, that early on in early modern Spain, early squared,
very late medieval,
very late medieval, the traditions of Martha the Good and Martha the Bad become saints that are both invoked, and there is no. They become conflated, whether they were two different figures at first, but Marta la Mala becomes this leader of demons and these things that subjugate other people. And some people even say that that's the Martha that rides the Tarrasque, that, the other one, like, right. She split herself in two somehow when this conversion happened, and she, like, part of her becomes saint. So I've read one song, I've never heard it sung, but I've read it, that she actually died fighting the Tarrasque, so she became an instant saint, and she immediately went back to guide the people and show how to work. So the Tarrasque won in some way, but the part of her that the dying and pain and everything, which is a lot of left-handed Saint Laura, is like the human side, becomes this figure that can be worked with in another way.
It's the means by which she gains her wings.
Yeah,
and so it's absorbed into her.
And literally the bad one gains its wings by the Tarrasque's wings.
Yeah.
So it's this, and you see the wonderful kind of almost fairy queen imagery in some woodcuts and illustrations of this weird conglomerate chimera with a woman on it, like guided by the cross. And Martha becomes, I think, a very popular image in modern saint cult, especially amongst the younger set, the younger crowd, that does not conflict the same way that a lot of the older neo-pagan crowd does. And what I mean by that is that there is a trend in the last 10 to 15 years that is incorporating more of Christianity into a neo-pagan framework, which is the framework of modern magic, let's face it. It is the popular framework. I'm not saying it's the only framework, but something, when it becomes popular, it meets the dominant paradigm. And Martha becomes a guise for Hecate. Martha becomes a guide for the psychopomp. Martha becomes a guise, not a guide. She is a guide, but I'm not pronouncing my consonants well today. And so she becomes
when she gets a torch.
Yeah, she has her torch, the torch of St. Martha, that is reversed. Like, what are these things? She becomes the guide. of what that is, and plus being witness to Lazarus and miracles of resurrection attested to her. I find her such an interesting figure because of that.
Yeah, so she has all sorts of stuff around. I like the fact that she's not just a dead raiser, but she's also a vegetarian dead raiser, which there does seem to be some correlation between, not exclusively, but it's always nice when you hear that she eschewed flesh and all fat, meat, eggs, cheese, and wine, apparently.
You're not as good a vegetarian as her, Al.
No. But part of the joy of being the kind of vegetarian I am is appreciating the deep alchemy of cheese on many levels.
I wish I could eat it.
Yeah, sorry,
I can. It just invokes its own demons.
So she raises a young lad who is so enamored with coming to see her speak that he tries to swim across a river, the river of Rhone, apparently. This is in Avignon, right? And
the Tarrasque was roaming outside of Avignon too, so you have this whole the Avignon papacy type of lore in that whole area, but heretical France and Spain.
So she saves another thing out of the water. In short, he drowns on the way there, but he's taken up and presented at the feet of Martha, and she then, quote, "in the manner of a cross, fell down to the ground and prayed in this manner, and prayed to Adonai and Lord Jesus Christus, and took him by the hand, and forthwith he arose living and received the holy baptism as well, crucially." So again, you've got this notion of taking something that slithered out of the water that everyone's very unhappy about, whether or not it's the corpse of a young starstruck fan or a horrible chimeric dragonfish beast monster, and converts. And thus brings, and also the fact that the whole, obviously it's not unique to her either, but the whole falling down and getting up, that's something that she's also said to have done regularly. One of the features of just how holy she was that she would, kneel down and bowed her knees 100 times a day and 100 times a night, which again feels like one of those kind of slightly mantra-y things, right?
Yeah, and certainly I think also the servant side of things, that she was so obsessed with the household chores, and Jesus kind of pushes her away from that, and her reprimanding of Jesus when he finds out Lazarus is sick and comes, and she's like, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. You are the reason he's dead, which is that whole instant transference. And he's like, he'll rise again. And she says, yeah, well, I know he'll rise again because you've talked about the judgment day, and I get that, but I'm still pissed off.
Right.
Is the sentiment. I'm not quoting directly here. But that Jesus then asks her, do you believe that, I am the way, the truth, and the life type of thing? And that she says, yes, I believe this, and Jesus says, take me to him, and resurrects him. And this is also the key point of and Jesus wept. Jesus cries at the for there were no more worlds to conquer. Perhaps. Of course, you went there, but it's the and I remember what is it? Chariots of Fire. Is that the movie?
Maybe.
Yeah. I hope it is. In my head, I'm confusing with Blazing Saddles. I'm thinking Flaming Chariots, which is not really what it is. But what happens when you win, when you achieve your goal? It's not just I'm going to Disneyland anymore. The huge letdown, the kind of Monte Cristo thing of you get your revenge, and what happens to you afterwards.
Yeah.
Now that you've made your life about one specific thing, not a guiding question, not something that can drive you forward, but once it's accomplished, what happens? And so this trinity of people that made their lives about Jesus and witnessed this horrible thing within the context of everything, and go to a foreign land where people are like, who are you? Seriously, you're talking about some dead dude that may or may not have risen from the dead. We don't know. We don't trust you. But Martha as a saint of the common person is really interesting. She becomes the saint for the daughters that weren't pretty enough to get married right away. She becomes the saint for women to control men, control the beast in man, and tame it. Certain saints have that reputation of beastiousness, and she earns hers because of the Tarrasque, not necessarily because of her own nature. She was a little bit overbearing, let's say, in the Gospels, but I find that interesting. Like, we're recording today is St. Christopher's Day, and I'll get my blog post up today. But Christopher is an overlooked saint as well, because he's a giant ogre of a man, and he served the devil before serving Jesus, and that part is forgotten. So there is like this whole conversion that happens to him of serving the most powerful thing. He serves a physical king. The king crosses himself at the devil. He thinks the devil's more powerful, vows to serve the devil, and then something happens where the devil or a demon crosses, like gets scared of, or gets repelled by the sign of the cross and says, fine, I'll serve him. Where is he? And the conversion of that. St. Christopher is used in early modern Iberian magic, both New World and Old World, quote unquote, scare quotes, air quotes, Christopher is used when you've already had relations with a man and want to continue talking to him. Martha is used to tie the nature of a man, period. And both of them have these things associated with them, which I find wonderfully interesting. So, yeah.
So when do we get to Martha the Dominator then?
Well, the influence is there with Martha la Mala already. That there is Martha the bad, Martha the evil, who is already being mentioned, along with literally she's called La Draga in the female dragon, alongside Maria Padilla. By the time you get the historical 13th century woman, who we don't know if Maria Padilla was originally the same Maria Padilla of Pedro the Cruel, but like it starts getting so confused, and anytime someone starts referencing it, Maria Padilla is always referenced with the lame devil, and then oftentimes with Marta la Mala and her demons coming with. So there's a lot of conflation as to what this is. Some people just feel it's like the folk magic side coming in of tying men's nature and using things around the house to maintain household and to maintain upward mobility with Maria Padilla, who is always about ambition.
Right.
And then to have Martha keep appearances and make sure things are a certain way. And using the traditional other things like St. Anthony to find a husband for your daughters by turning them upside down. There's just the very attestable Catholic folk magic of early modern Spain, which is just contemporary. I always have a problem with saying early modern Mexico because, like, what does that mean? But contemporaneous Spanish colonies, which was a mixture of more than just European things, obviously. But I think Marta la Mala then lays the groundwork for Martha the Dominator, which is a whole other thing that's still being investigated, the roots, because in some areas she is a point of Aida that walks in the cemetery as a wife of the Baon, Baon Cimetière, or Baon de Cementerio, actually, because it's in the DR that she exists.
Yeah.
But the relationship of 21 Divisions with Haitian Voodoo is already such a thing of, like, the denial on one side of, like, we don't do what they do.
Sure. And the very distinctive use of one icon, the older one with the dragon on the leash for some stuff, and for particular Loire and powers, as opposed to the quote-unquote newer Martha the Dominator.
The Indian snake charmer image.
Right.
Which then is also used for Mami Wata. So you get the more modern expression of Mami Wata coming, which is an older cult than people probably wanted to admit 10 years ago because it was not as researched. But Mami Wata, there's, was it Sacred Waters? It's a fantastic book. It's like 700 pages thick with... we can swear on our own show. I can say shit ton. It's okay. Of photos that show that Mami Wata is a plethora of cults that go under that name of the goddess of the waters, the deity of the waters that brings riches, and she's likes foreign things because she might herself be a foreigner. But there's also the debate of, like, are mermaids a European thing or were they imported? And you know what? They had mermaids too. They made it's not like convergent evolution does exist in the animal kingdom, so it should exist in mythology as well. The idea of cryptozoology is not unique to Europe,
right?
But
and the motherhood aspect as well, the idea of eventually having these fertility points is found, even if we're going to talk about contemporary iconography with this baby that suddenly turns up on the Dominator statues. Yeah.
Lots of babies, which were young children in some of the original things of just playing with the snake charmer type of thing, but then become interpreted as she's Lilith, she's these other demonesses that are the serpent and the what she is, being all complexified. And this is all under the torchlight of Martha.
And it seems apt because there are plenty of Lady Saints and Madonnas who are...
You say it like your wife now.
Considered... Yeah, I do. Who are considered, Potnotherian, mistress of beasts, queen of... And this connection to the animal kingdom. But it's expressly the... I do not like the term, the supernatural. It's expressly not the inhuman mysteries of the forest or of the beast of the field. It's something weird and unnatural that emerges into our world, and that must be repelled or exorcised or tamed. And that use of the girdle as well has a bunch of stuff obviously attached. I think that's interesting to distinguish between when a dragon is a serpent and representative of, so many different things as it shed its skin across time and slithered hither and thither and zigzagged and left that trail, as distinct from a dragon as demonic and as older, maybe as primordial or antediluvian, those kinds of ideas. And certainly tying into European demonology of these guys having been around for a while.
The dangers in equating dehorning the demons and those dangers of some demons are demonic by our modern standards and some demons are angelic by our modern standards, and
right.
the dangers of our own interpretation always, we always interpret according to what we're interpreting. We impose ourselves upon the study, and it's very good always to consider the opposite as still that thing of like. It's very popular to say that St. Patrick was getting rid of the druids, and those are the snakes, and it plays into a lovely myth. For sure, of what those things were.
Well, it's layers upon layers, right?
Yes.
It's Witch Patrick. It's. Are we talking about the records we have of him at the time? Are we talking about the ones a century later? Are we talking about the ones like many centuries later when we're trying to turn him into this like action hero and they're trying to HBO him up and talk about how he's
just
like,
gone with Bridget.
Right. Talk about how he's beheading fools left and right and being a kind of an asshole.
Yeah, and here you have the memory of anybody being utilized by those that are. It will never the accurate story will never be there. Everybody is a varied can of worms, but the memories of the saints themselves. I mean, we look at popular folk heroes, even or just modern people of when they die. Some people choose not to speak ill of the dead, but there's also sometimes they're vilified for a very two-dimensional, one-dimensional image of them, and sometimes they're held up as heroic, and you're like, but they did all these things too. Which is the fullness of the esoteric Christian side of the fullness of the body of Christ, is that all those things exist simultaneously. And the amazing thing, perhaps in the pseudo-Manichaean / Bogomilian split that is like left-handed, right-handed saints in whether it's called by that name or not, but the division between the earthly nature of a saint versus the heavenly nature of a saint, and what is still burning off in purgatory type of thing, if it exists still under the current pope, because I'm always very confused. But yeah, I think there's something interesting there in examining the different memories of these things, and Martha herself with the upright torch versus the averse torch. Averse?
Yeah.
Is down? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Reverse, averse. It's like English is like it's like I've come from a faraway land and are trying to remember how English works. It's a good thing there's an Englishman in the room. But the downward torch is a common funereal implement and has been incorporated now to heavily be talked about with Martha. I don't know how far back it goes, but I know that the mention of the torch of St. Martha is a big thing, and a big thing in my own workings and devotions to her. And ankylosauruses. Sorai? Sauruses. Soru. Anything else about Martha you think is... I mean, there's a lot, but...
Of course, yeah.
You'll see a theme with the things we're bringing up today. It's just it felt like a good time for a shift in talking about many of these things. I think Tarragon, obviously, ties very naturally into
Sure,
an
yeah.
extension of Martha.
Yeah, and a wider study of draconic botany, I guess. It's the dragonist one, probably.
Yeah.
I would guess. And the simple explanation for why they're linked is that it is the go-to herb for her, right? It's named after the Tarrasque as well. Has a host of names that are also the dragon, whether that's Dracunculus, in the esoteric Latin of little dragon, or the French has the same. Medieval English has the same, also calls it dragon's herb or dragon's wort, apparently, or even dragon's mugwort, because it is an artemisia, and so connected to mugwort.
It's a temperamental artemisia, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it doesn't... I mean, I guess from my experience of growing it here in New York, it's very easy. Mugwort grows because it's a quote-unquote weed. You cannot stop mugwort. Wormwood, once established, it's pretty damn easy, but doesn't disperse like the weed.
Right.
It takes whatever. And Tarragon is like, I don't like your soil, and I don't like your heat, and no. So you can see that this seems to be a common thing because there's a lot of substitutes for Tarragon. It is not as outside of France and the French Tarragon. That's just a made-up accent. That's not actually an attempt at anything.
And there's a Russian version of it as well, right?
Yes, but it's considered inferior. In fact, I'm going to say that the Mexican Tarragon is a far better substitute. So says 7 out of the 8 things I researched for this little exegesis.
And how many were in
Tarragon.
Spanish?
Only 3, but Wikipedia supports me, and therefore the great gods of Wiki.
That's cool.
I swear I had nothing to do with the writing of that article. But Tagetes lucida, which is not an actual Tarragon, the reason I think it's important and ties into Martha, and then I'll shut up and let you. But that Tagetes lucida, or Texas Tarragon, Texas mint, Mexican oregano, is yautli. It is one of the most sacred plants of the Mexica, the Central Valley Indians. This is the original flower of the dead, Day of the Dead. So marigolds are a substitute for the flowers that are on Tagetes lucida, which, if you look at Day of the Dead food, it often has an anise flavor to it.
Right.
It is mimicking the leaves of Tagetes lucida, which has an anise-like tarragon flavor.
Yeah.
And the little tiny flowers on it, this is the original cempasúchil, which is now the name given to marigold. It's a bright orangish yellow flower, and it is intrinsically connected to the dead. It was one of the main incenses that was used because it's a dried leaf that grows abundantly and has a very pungent smell without lingering. So when it's burning and when it's in things, you can has this the anise flavor is really lovely. But it is extremely easy to grow. Excuse me, hiccups. Just the idea of what yautli is and cempasúchil, and that this was banned popularly by the Spanish in colonialism in an effort to stamp out its use, because this was one of the main cleansing herbs. So rosemary and rue became the substitutes for several different pairings, but yautli was almost universal. And I think Lopez Austin goes into this a lot. Because that's the 2 last names, not the first and the last name. But incredibly important researcher into Central Valley Mexican cosmology, Nahuatl cosmology, and looking at the herbs there. And I think it's Aztec medicine, nutrition, and health goes heavily into yautli. So just all of that with the necromantic side, the psychopompic side of what Martha is. It's also paired heavily with possible other plants that were blown in the face of someone before they were sacrificed. So it is that kind of psychopompic. You're gonna have fun and you're gonna talk to the gods now, and also combined with other herbs that are known. At least the formula that results is psychoactive and does increase contact with the dead specifically by result. Many people pair it up with Sinaquiche, which is not from the same area necessarily, but I don't think it's historically used together, but modern people are. Sinaquiche being used to have auditory hallucinations, quote-unquote hallucinations, but it's a sun tea that's made that's like a rotten 3 to 5 days out in the high sun at summer, makes a potent broth. But I think yautli is also just a consecrator. It brings the blessings of the heart, soul, the personality. It brings that side out, the spice of it. But
So you think mainly the I don't want to say affinity, but the relationship between these guys and Rosemary is one of kind of mainly conquest.
Between Mexican things and rosemary, we know that it was an absolute substitute, just like aloe itself, which is a foreign plant. The lore seems to be originally about maguey, about agave, which was the plant that gave fiber. Remember, they dressed in sisal, which is agave plant. They made pulque, which is what we make tequila from now, but the heart nectar of the agave plant, it is what the tilma that Juan Diego had, the Virgin of Guadalupe, is imprinted upon maguey. And so it's what they use for bloodletting. The tips of it is what was put through the tongue 8 times a day. Anyway, just the native lore of the plants gets transposed and banned specifically. We know that there were things of you are not allowed to grow this plant. And you can grow these things instead, because they had to tend missionary gardens, so mission gardens in the different ways. But yeah, tarragon is a common culinary herb because of its flavor. To take it back to, and this is New World Tarragon, so it is again a different plant, but I do think it is important because it does receive all of this kind of tarragon lore with it, to the point of it being identified as a Tarrasque herb, that this is sown in the tail of the Tarrasque and therefore it's evil. And that is why you can't use it, you stupid indigenous people of justifying what it is. And then using native varieties of wormwood, which are incredibly bitter and often have more hallucinogenic alkaloids which is very true of West Coast wormwood and even mugwort in the United States and down through the Sierra Madre Mountains going into Mexico. So there's higher demons. The plants themselves have a little slighter potency on the psychoactive side.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting relationship going on there, right, with how it's an artemisia, so of course it's going to be used to ward off insects and worms that might eat away at things, prevent decay. It seems to have had a big use in sweetening the breath, and also being used to deal with toothache, which presumably comes from the idea of teeth worms. That an awful lot of that seems a very prevalent notion, that a lot of toothache is the result of these little worms in the gums that are causing trouble.
I mean, yeah, I'll take it. Worms live in holes.
Yeah,
little holes in the teeth. And they also eat metal, which I find interesting too, right? So worms eat the body. So there's this concept thing of what is a worm by modern definition. And on that note, too, the memory of the red worm, right? The earthworm that is everywhere, and how it is not native to the Western Hemisphere and destroyed 40 to 60% of native wildlife upon its introduction by the Europeans, probably traceable to Virginia itself, as destroying native forests because there is not an earthworm that is native. It's a National Geographic article a while back. Really willing to be corrected, but I'm quoting National Geographic there. Jamestown killed our forests. Or maybe it was Roanoke, I don't know. Better myth there. So worms. Tarragon does it have the same effectiveness as, say, wormwood, which is known for it? I mean, because one of the hints in our lovely scientific materialist view of wormwood being effective against fleas and things like that is because of its bitterness and the alkaloids in it that make it quite inhospitable to things that need to crawl over it. They get their own versions of contact dermatitis, but tarragon is much more sweet.
Which again is that thing of not destroying the pests, but sweetening it in some way.
Interesting.
And it has that quality of protection from venomous reptiles. It's used in and various other venomous things by extension, while also being identified with the thing, which I find interesting as well. That it's both the dragon-made plant and also the defense against the dragon from a plant.
Oh, that's lovely. Those types of dichotomies are always wonderful.
Yeah, you can have it. You can wield it, or you can be eaten by it. And those seem present in some of the surfing around them interwebs and looking at modern spells that are using this kind of stuff. And it's interesting to see modern folk magic workings to induce toothache in people you don't like through the use of a skull candle, especially women cursing men.
Rightly so.
Which feels interesting in terms of when we get to her, all the stuff about Cassandra's brother, Helenus, who is also prophetic, but everyone listens to him. And so it's just like this little microcosm of the meeting hell that so many women describe to me, of like the professional working environment of saying a thing and being ignored. And
mansplained?
Yeah.
Man prophesized?
Well, man prophesized, and also, I can't remember I'm sure there's a term for it these days, but a man repeating exactly what you just said, and everyone being like, that's a great point. Like, I wish someone had said that before. So this notion of men's words and how how the weight is different, and the idea of setting the dragon ruled by Martha against
this. With Cassandra, we might as well interrelay all these things, but the prominent thing for Cassandra with me, in addition to 12 Monkeys, is the idea that she refused Apollo and was successful at it, and therefore, because she was beloved by him, she had the gift of prophecy, but because she refused his sexual advances, he therefore said, no one can believe you.
Well, it's a horrible version. It looks like a horrible version of exactly, the anti-consent lecture thing, that she says yes and then changes her mind, and that's why she's punished. Particularly cringy, at the very least.
Well, and I'm not making excuses for Apollo, and in any way, it's a decided difference from his father and uncles when they go after someone. Apollo has a lot more like turning people into trees things, or his own lovers turning into trees to hide from him, which is like, what's the revision of those things? Myths should always adapt, and if we need to talk about rape culture or misogyny or many things, the myths should be like, I've seen a lot of dialogue. Don't change the myths to meet you. Change the myths. Change them. They're already written down in other forms. Like, what good is something if you cannot suit what you need it to be?
Right.
And other people will take their value centers and do that. But like, myth is true because it is one truth. It is your truth, and what do we learn from that? But it's just, I don't like it when people are like, oh yeah, again, we are interpreting from a modern perspective, and we're adding our own things in, and we're maybe Mandela affecting everything backwards. That's part of oral tradition.
That's also, exactly. That's actually a very traditional way of doing things.
It has to adapt. The saint has to become two people for whatever reason. And here you have Cassandra, who is, by her own accounts, very proud of the fact that she refused Apollo. He didn't necessarily take all gifts away or kill them or many of the other things that his father and uncle do, but the Medusa factor of Poseidon punishing or Athena punishing, or all these different forms of, I got raped in the temple of a different goddess, and now I'm cursed to look like my sisters, curiously. So like, that's a whole other complex mythology. But Cassandra, she's an interesting dead magician in the sense that she's we're talking pseudo-historical.
For sure, yeah. So, daughter of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, who obviously has a bunch of stuff to her as well. Really interesting bits and pieces.
The Hecatean conflation. So the main thing for her is that no one believes her. That she is doomed to speak the truth, but not a single person follow her advice.
Right, that her advice is not followed, so she's ignored, or when she is paid attention to, she's believed mad.
Yes.
Right, so there's a layer there.
I love the thing that says, oh, she's very beautiful, but very mad. Like, gorgeous brown hair and, like, very lovely eyes, but, like, completely bonkers.
Yeah.
Which is just like, okay, wow. Again, the most accurate seeress that you have in the area, and the commentary is like, beautiful but mad. You're like, okay.
She's a looker.
And, everyone wants to think that they'd believe Cassandra if it was them. Right. But that's her curse. Her muggle magic, or her veil of illusion is that
it's a reputation magic. What she does doesn't change. She isn't like blinded or cursed to with the rose at her mouth to have her words like actually come out wrong. Like what she's saying is fine. It's almost a curse on everyone else that hears her. And so this idea of poisoning a reputation almost, but the reputation becomes more important than the encounters with her. I find that really interesting. And I guess it's also, I don't know, worth thinking about how divination itself in a modern secularist materialist overculture is kind of
overculture, yes,
seen as crazy itself.
I think the effects too of not being listened to, of the insanity also having a root in the, first off, she's a seeress, so she's naturally not of the same
timeline,
something going on. She's in a non-linearly bound, perhaps non-pragmatically bound, even if she is speaking prophecy that's pragmatic. But we know from contextualization that prophecy is rarely pragmatic when you first hear it.
Yeah.
But that as Troy Burns, she's depicted in art a lot as as fully insane because no one listens to her. She knows exactly what's going on, and no one listens to her. So the insanity is perhaps the true punishment from Apollo there, of you're not going to be able to convince anyone.
Yeah, born from isolation.
Yeah.
But it isn't a divine madness that's injected into her. He just sets up the conditions by which she is sent mad by
yes.
it. Oh, yeah. Some strong carkery kind of stuff there. I tell you what else is interesting, one that I hadn't come across before, is there is another version of her curse that is put on her because she falls asleep in a temple. And it is said that snakes licked or whispered into her ears so that she could hear the future. So again, we get the auditory input, shall we say, and that's a lot more clearly an infraction that doesn't make the god look quite so rape broy, but it's also an interesting one in terms of dream incubation and the idea of what are the conditions by which prophecy might reach us, which I think is really interesting. And of course the idea of snakes for a start, and their wisdoms and their untoward wisdoms, but also the vapors which we get from Delphic oracles and things like that. So the notion of the wending tentacular serpents of smokes and vapors and things, that which rises, that which explores and
fumic
dissipates.
fangs.
Yeah. The very fact that the snake itself is tasting the air for its olfactory business. I think that's really interesting.
And also, she has it's not true that she was never believed. She was believed once, very strongly, which was when she accused Paris of being the one that and accurately so, but that lined up and everyone believed her then because it set a war in motion, which is such an interesting thing of you never believe the woman in the corner who's babbling madness until you can interpret it yourself as something that is convenient for you.
Right.
Yeah, that's difficult.
Is that a profound parable on the nature of not shopping around for a divination that happens to agree with what you already thought?
Yeah, perhaps, said the diviner.
That's a very Cauda Draconis thing. Plenty of the in the first house, plenty of the medieval geomancers, late medieval, early modern, certainly by that point, argue that if Cauda turns up, the dragon's tail turns up in the first house, the querent is probably already decided what they've done. There is a closed gate. They're not into taking on new information. They're looking for someone to confirm the thing that they want to do, or crucially don't want to do.
That's interesting. I find that the dichotomy between Cauda and Caput so interesting, and then their parallels Odu-wise, but that Cauda is correspondent to Ogunda, which is a stubborn Odu. It's violence, it's war, the machete must chop, and you can guide it. But it is said there's no true ire in Ogunda. There's no true blessing. You have to figure out how to move it forward and make it a blessing. You have to create from the destruction if you're going to make it advantageous for yourself and other people. And Cauda certainly has it rougher than Caput in the Figaro balance here. Well, that was a segue right there. So I might as well just Caput Draconis, Figaro wise. Speak.
figure-wise, the head of the dragon. You know,
that's translation-wise.
The treasures that emerge from the dragon. You know, straight from the dragon's mouth. It is the open door. It is the path before you. It is the grand yes. To the cosmos, we might say, universe. It is a big old. It is a big old thumbs up.
Oh, universe! I love you. It's not called the Meaniverse or the Weeniverse. Yeah. But Marge, it's you to us, not you to you.
So it's a figure of yes, and it's very easy to see that as, this is wonderful, and certainly it gets a lot of praise. Schwei and Pesca in their astrological geomancy spend a lot of time saying it's about karma, it's about higher spiritual yesitudes and goodness vibes. It's also the yes in the 6th house that says, yes, you're very ill, come on in, all the sicknesses. It's also the yes in the 7th house that is let's have all the arguments in this marriage, in this partnership, in this business relationship, in this rivalry. There's plenty of things that it says yes to that is not terribly useful, but on the whole, it's a figure of this will happen.
And I find it wonderfully unique as a geomantic figure because of the Draconi are further elaborations of the interaction between the moon and the sun,
right?
And are a singular ascription, which is also rarer in the meaning north node and south node, as opposed to the figures of the moon, the figures of Mars,
right?
And what that means. So, and undecidedly the only ones that are not disputable, because the planet descriptions mutate. Wow, are mutable. With variations, not always, not to the same degree of, like, it's not a free-for-all, but, like, there is no way that you're going to displace Caput and Cauda Draconis,
right.
Because they are the astrological mentions right there, where the moon crosses the ecliptic.
They kind of have to be.
And which is interesting, too, timing-wise, for all this, because the longest lunar eclipse in a very long time is happening. It's not visible from the United States, but it is happening this Friday. So it is Anabi Bezan. But the idea of, and all the lore that's coming up, the Facebook lore, the FML lore, of what an eclipse means, and astrologically, eclipses aren't good.
No,
it's bad conjunction and bad opposition, and the dragon is trying to eat the light, which is bad. And a lunar eclipse that lasts this long, this is a definite long one, and it's been a season of eclipses for a few years now. But Caput Draconis is, do you ascribe Sagittarius to it as well? I know that's one of the commoner.
You can do. I mean, obviously the zodiacal ones shift around a lot more. Generally, when I'm reading, I tend to avoid giving it too much of a zodiacal identity to tie it down. I just talk about it as the benefics, particularly Jupiter and Venus.
I think that's probably why Sagittarius comes up. It's just because Sagittarius is a warm sign that's not like Leo and Aries still.
And it's the light that passes.
Right? Yes. And the visual metaphor has always been very helpful in understanding cardinal, fixed, and mutable, with Aries being the firebrand, the spark, Leo being the bonfire, and Sagittarius being the coals. It's just a very easy understanding to visualize what the qualities, those three qualities, are. Yeah. And Caput Draconis as a figure seems to have far more benefic, reputation than its corresponding Odu. Because Osa is sudden cataclysmic change. And I find that interesting, that if we look at the anatomy of the figure, right, at least the way my brain still interprets it, there's an absence of fire and everything else is manifesting. So in some ways, screw the elemental ascriptions to those dots, but there's an absence of the highest command down. It is like we have no place to go but like manifesting into matter. that there's like this arrow. It's one of those ones that looks like an arrow in some way. Whether it's Justicia or any of these ones that is just like, okay, there's something, it's down.
Right,
it's going into the earth.
That's typically the way that in European geomancy we distinguish between a stable and a mobile figure, or an entering, exiting, or liminal figure. Is how pointy is it towards us? What's coming to us?
Yeah.
What's here to stay? And it is one of the pointiest. So the idea of like what you can drive into the ground.
And in the hand geomancy of it is, if you're going to do the double as an extension of the finger, then this is literally the pointy finger. This is the index finger extended.
Yeah.
Extended? Wow. Extended. Outstanding. But Osa has the reputation of the Harmattan, the violent sandstorms that suddenly come, cataclysmic weather, sudden fires, things like this. Osa has a particularly strong reputation with the witches, and I do not mean those who can convert to being witches. We in Yoruba lore, the Aje are supernatural beings that some people do claim to work with and ally with, but they are amoral female forces, and there are different versions of the same story that's told, where sometimes it's Orumila's coming down, sometimes it's the Meji of Osa, being very careful not to say the words and invoke those things, but that to my memory there is the Mejis are coming down, so the 16 primary Odu are coming down, and everybody has to figure out who they're going to go with, and there's some sacrifice of like goat and cloth and something like this, and Osa says, I ain't giving my clothes up. And so the other Odu are parading around, and they come and they see the mother of witches, who is a named figure, one of the leader of the Iami. But they see her naked and trembling and asking for a ride down, and no one can give it to her because they can't hide her under the cloth. The cloth is the container, but the cloth is a grand metaphor here for amniotic sac, for all these things of how do we manifest in the world? How do we pierce the veil? Well, we must have a veil to be pierced. How do we break through from one realm into another? So Osa is the rip of the cloth. There's a violence there that has an intrinsic relationship to Ogunda, which is the thing that penetrates the cloth. So there is the thought that and who is a primary expression of Osa energy is Oya, whose name literally means the terror, the ripper, the thing that rends cloth. And cloth also has the metaphor of the very fabric of reality is likened to cloth. So we're tying off the head, which is making a universe of a calabash of our head, and other things that are going into that. But Osa, she can't. The mother of witches is pleading with Osa, take me down. In some versions, it's Orunmila himself, and he says, okay, and he swallows her, and he comes down to the earth. All the original Odu are men, and then there's Oshun, so Oshimeji, but he comes down and says, okay, time to come out, and she's like, oh, no, I'm good right here, and he freaks out because, what are you going to eat? And she's like, do you not have intestines? I'll be fine for a long time, and this is the type of understanding about witchcraft, this kind, quote, the political idea. Witchcraft is, again, a political accusation, and is destruction of the body from the inside out, the rotting, the emotions, the definition of witchcraft being intimacy, that it's the people that you curse, not this person from afar, that it's the things that drive emotion and that have sat with us at our table, and these are the people that bring up this violent cataclysmic change. Because when the change happens to a whole community, that community bonds together. It's an interesting difference there. Right. But that in order to do it, he has to consult the oracle, and the oracle says, look, go get a bunch of insides of an animal, put it by a tree, tie it with cloth, and call to her, and he vomits her up and turns around and never looks back at that. And serving the mother of witches in that way, it is a potent force, but we don't even... It is a force that is accessible to those it's accessible to. And it is naturally accessible to women in a way that it can never be accessible to men because of the violent cataclysmic change that is the womb of 3 to 5 days of blood flow and then surviving it. So the violent cataclysms of sudden fertility and what that means of birth and all these things, that the breath that comes in. So the idea of the supernatural forces that bring change in that way is deified as Oya, of the water buffalo, who, this is obviously it is an Orisha that is very close for me. This is my second parent. But the idea that she doesn't like being a human as much as she likes being a water buffalo because eat shit, fuck, snort, like destroy things is her. It's if you can have an animal that is an embodiment of a tornado, like just like plow things down, go for it. Life is simple, and there's that idea too that even coming into the world that we have the choice and we make it complex because we have all these divergent little goals and divided attentions and going on, and the unity of it all is like you only get to do those things here. So that is why everyone's fighting to come back and incarnate and live the experiences of all the pain and the sadness and the joy, because you only do that here. The other world is considered very boring. And this is in direct contrast to, the other world is where we're going to finally have our pleasure in Christianity.
Right.
So it's like live your life now, and I find the side of that with Thurman's lectures in I think it's Liberation on Hearing in Between. So his translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, so called, the Bardo, he's like at some point you will realize that you are enlightened, have always been enlightened, and therefore you are experiencing all your pain and sadness now as an enlightened being. You just don't know it yet. So laugh it up, cry it up, crazy it up, because it's all present at the same time. And I think that is a very valuable message from Osai, is how do we contain this in a context that can then help it transition into something else? How do you ready yourself for the change that's coming? How do you be open to change but not live in fear of it? So you see the signs coming, the water is retreating, the tidal wave is coming. Yeah. Prepare. Yeah. Be prepared. Be able to handle it. Do not freak out when how do we deal with this, as opposed to, my whole world's upside down and I don't know what to do, and the world's ending. Well, it always feels like it's ending when the rug is pulled out from underneath you. Yeah. When you introduce new rats to other rats. But I don't know how that, it's one of those ones that I know is interesting because of the reputation astrologically of the tail and the head of the dragons. But geomantically, it is not quite as much the same harshness with this.
No, not usually. I mean, I guess you could, it certainly can come up where the door is like wrenched open, and certainly it's not great as a second witness often. The idea of like, you got halfway through the book and then suddenly realised that like, oh great, all this new research has just rendered everything you've written kind of pointless, or at least the old eon of whatever that was, with the revisionism that switched that over, and suddenly something's way older or way different than you thought it was. So there's definitely the sense of it not being welcome at certain points, that it's not useful to constantly be opening more and more doors. Because other things will come through, or simply because there's a point where you need to tie a ribbon around something and stick a fork in it and it be done. And
it's interesting, the pairing then, because it's opposite. I guess if you it's averse. If you reverse the dots, not 1 for 2 and 2 for 1, but rather flip it over, it becomes the other dragon, which is Ogunda. So you have the marriage between Oya and Ogun. Which is interesting because Ogun is the more earthy of the two. He's not the lightning in the sky and the blustering wind that is Oya, but notice that the earth is now missing in the sign, and like the deities are almost like making up for that interesting side of it too. It's an interesting pairing. And then if you go to its actual physical makeup opposite and you do 1 for 1 or 1 for 2 and 2 for 1, it becomes Leticia, which is one of Shango's main odus. So, hold on, I'm going to get slapped for that. Leticia's not an odu. Leticia's correspondent is Obata, and it's because I'm visualizing things, and the translation of this is going to, right there, guard yourself, pretty ones, because, what is it that was being quoted online? Boz was just saying it was a Terry Pratchett quote, like the same crowd that wants you to succeed will be the same crowd that crowns you will be the same crowd that calls for your beheading. Of like, okay, so that's Osa, that like flipping it over is there, but like, okay, so you have the fulfillment of Caput Draconis with Leticia of now there's only fire and the rest, and we talked about the fleeting nature of joy, and there's a relationship between those two, the sudden violent change. The change is violent. The change might be for the better. It can flip towards the good. But it's the fact that it is quick and sudden that is very difficult. It is hard to see it coming sometimes. Something
of disruptive technology as well, of the new thing that renders something else now kind of pointless. I think that's a powerful dimension of Caput as well, and therefore the idea that with Laetitia, I love that notion of not just active and passive dots, but of expanded and contracting, or focused and searching is the other one I like. And in that case, you have the idea that Laetitia is open to having an intellectual discussion, is open to sharing food, is open to sharing feelings and intimacy, but it is focused on this like fire of joy, and that there's something there that carries it through. That stops it just being like buffeted by the tides of just being populous, right? And when that's also interesting in terms of the elemental stuff, because you have Cauda Draconis is typically a fiery sign, the fiery sign that destroys. It's not the warming fire of Acquisitio or the gain fire or the need fire. It's the ashes at the end of things. And Caput is actually given to Earth, which again, if you think about that not just in terms of like Karka being an Earth sign, but Conjunctio can be thought of as an Earth sign as well. That's also a little bit not necessarily super standard, but these things often have a little bit more wiggle room than we think. But the idea of what
Especially if you just start promoting it and don't tell anyone that. Name your sources. Me.
A little bit. Not exclusively. I mean, we can get into why I think Gemini is a better Conjunctio sign is better for Conjunctio than Albus if we need to, but I don't think we do. The idea that the big yes is an earthy thing, and that the affirmation or the new start or the new beginning or the new opportunity or the thing that renders something else a new context is grounded and is of the earth, and therefore has to be responded to in those kinds of ways, and behooves a responsibility around it. I think is an interesting way that those are paired in a way we might not expect when we're also thinking about Fortuna Major being a fiery sign, and that primacy that's given to heat and light and that kind of stuff.
Really? Stop chewing on the wood, rat. Someone saw right there. It's like, not at all. Mice are gradual loss. Let's do some Lenormand type of thing. He's a rat, but
the way you're talking about sudden change feels much more in this kind of European geomancy to be a thing of via, if it's positive, or at least if it has the option to bring in that which is prosperous, and if it requires action, more to the point. To say it's positive is probably to overly cartoonish, but that idea of where it fits with the least number of dots, right? The figure of the path or the road, or also the moon that lights the way through the dark night, but also the moon that is briefly eclipsed by clouds and leaves us wandering around in the dark, not knowing what the hell we're doing.
That's why it has to be internal mood. Things we talked about. I think was VR our first one.
Oh, could well have been, yeah.
Yeah, just because still always the association with the moon, therefore Gabriel, therefore Jibril, therefore the sword of Ikra, the Aleph of Arabic, the idea that it is literally looks like a sword. It is the cutting start and finish of the first word Muhammad hears of the Quran is Ikra, recite. Which is recite from, or read, it's often translated out, but it's read from something you know, not, and he was illiterate. So it just, that side of Via is always interesting. That it is, there is no possible process of elimination because it is one way. There is, the only thing you can follow is what the inconstant moon is showing you. So best be in good fortune with the moon. Now, Via and Populus are interesting to consider since if we're talking about lunar signs, we're still talking about the nodes, which is an interaction of solar and lunar, because it's the ecliptic, but it's referred to as the north and south nodes of the moon, not the north and south nodes of the moon and sun paths of plenty.
And the relation of the Earth there as well. So there is almost the sense of the eighth planet being where we are, which I like about the nodes.
I think, too, the idea of sudden change and what that is, because if even though this is varying on the Orisha, that is primarily often thought to express itself in Osa, which is Oya, and heavily Yamaya is there too, but which confuses many people. But don't believe that bullshit about them being enemies. But that Elegua's prominent son, who we know, is Eshu. So the idea of accident being the child of sudden change, of violent change, and Elegua being, or Eshu being, the argument that you can survive, the little things, the little problems, and that Eshu tests us and becomes the stone in our pathway, so that we learn to deal with the instability of daily life, through which increases our character and our readiness to be able to handle things, which then prepares us for when Mama comes to town, when the big change happens and something else happens there. And that is that's an interesting idea, that like it's we're talking about antidote here, or through vaccination against accident and trauma and silent and violent change. I'm thinking out loud here. This is not like don't quote me on this shit.
No, that's really interesting. The building of resilience through the tiny annoyances and the little nibblings of the.
When we say that Eshu builds character, what does it build? What is how does that build character? Through exposure to those things and knowing you can this too shall pass type of attitude of, I got this. This is don't sweat the small stuff. In Basque they would say fire and water below the knees. If the flood or the fire is still below the knees, you're good. You're going to survive it. Yeah, okay. It's just something interesting there about that. The child of Oya being that, and then prominently the other side of it being the dead, and what are the Egungun, which is not the dead, but the mounting Orisha of the dead, the Egungun society, which is conflated with Egun, and it's very hard to parse apart. But we know the presence of the spirit, which is the respiration here, this connection between the breath and animate life, and those things, that the exhalations of somebody when they die, where does that go? If that was their animating force, what happened to it? Right. And can that animate somebody else while they're still living, therefore possess them with the dead? And what, when the air flows in the cloth, is it, what is it? If the dead come down from heaven in the form of rain, or ride the rain down, and storm is still prior to that, it's such an interesting mixture and relationship of mapping the sacred into the world around you, and mapping the world of around you onto the sacred. Like it's a reflexive relationship that should not be seen opposed. That this idea of mundane and spiritual is a convenient Western Sunday religion thing, and which I think in some ways ties us into our discussion of household magic, the overlap between the quote unquote mundane and spiritual, the housework of Martha.
Oh, massively, yeah.
And into the divine occupation of a house that is clean is able to receive company, a house that is well stocked and knows its inventory of food is able to entertain guests, right, and help people out through charity, a house that is warm and knows its fire and stacks the wood means that it can keep the inhabitants warm. And therefore we shift from housewife, servant, into priestess of the house, which, as far as Western Europe goes, is a huge thing. And I don't think we can talk household magic without at least invoking Likoto's household spirits, and the importance of the house as a temple, and the idea that every angle in your house has a spirit associated with it, and there's the windows and the doors and the bed frame, and these things are spirits. They are minor spirits, but there are hobs and gobs associated with them, as well as larger spirits of spinning and the domestic activities that allow for one to do other things. Right.
And versions of far older spirits, as my wife is fond of saying about the hearth and the tap, the faucet.
Yes.
These are old
grandfather fire and grandmother water type of servants of the importance of the cook. Certainly in ATRs you see this heavily, the sacredness of the kitchen, and it is I think one of the things that, as modern pagan revivals and reconstructions and all these things start to experience a more constant expression of that sacredness, that we will continue to see a quick deification of things bringing in those household gods. Again, household cult, very different from state cult. Those things that organize a society and justify the actions of its political leaders is state religion. And that is what we see oftentimes in the Homeric relation of things like the gods that allow Paris to steal the Helen and therefore have Cassandra prophesying and these things that punish in those ways. But what is it? What is your relationship with the spiders in your house? What is the relationship with the leaky pipe? And you know its ways. You know its peculiar ways because you have to turn the faucet on at 3/4 of an angle and then like wait for a minute. And then if you turn it on fully after that
way.
Exactly. Those are familiarity with household spirits. There's now an embodiment that is different with those things.
And that this is not necessarily about trying to force with a neo-pagan continuation and a folk turn, which we're arguably seeing in occultism and magic and lived magic, is not trying to force things into the shapes of it's not I don't think it's a contrarian tendency. I think it's the idea of genuinely trying to look at the differences and similarities of revealed and natural religions, if we want to put it like that, or simply that there are ways of being in your house that can be as sacred as going and doing whatever, being smelled and belled at a church or something.
And I like looking at Pyrenean folklore here heavily, the Basque, Catalonia, the Aragonese, because of the documented relationship of matrifical culture and the sacredness of the house, and specifically the idea that you give your paycheck as a man over to the oldest woman of the house who is managing the accounts. And part of this comes from it's the experienced womb. It's the womb, especially the older women are not having a womb that's filled up with blood and the concern of children. There can be young women that are in charge of houses, but I think the observation that when the womb is no longer bleeding, then it is the perfect womb to contain the womb of the house and its potential as to what that is, and that men are the expendable ones by nature, which is a complete reversal from the normal spin on these things. The sacredness of women permits them to be temple priestesses and therefore house priestesses in a different way. But I find the record of that so interesting, that in a lot of Hispanic culture, which has a lot of those traditions, continuing the idea that you hand your paycheck over to your grandmother.
Right, and that's starting with the economics of it is really useful to do, and I think highlights very often that there's a more complicated thing going on than simply an apt or a neat division of public and private spheres. That certainly talking about whether women, medieval women could own property or not is a more complicated issue than we might think of initially. And there are revisionist feminist readings of things that highlight the highly contextual nature of who does what when and how, but also that it's an easy trap to fall into, suggest that there are no precedents for women owning property or being the keeper of the keys, as my sister loves to talk about, in terms
Klepoth,
of in terms of landladies, in terms of pubs.
But this is a Western European thing. If you look at Spanish church traditions, it is not the priest who has the keys to their own church. It is an older woman who has now adopted the church as an extension of her own home, who lives next to it or on the property, and the priest has to go see her to be let into his own church. This is still practiced in the mountains there. I would love to talk to your wife about more of the Italian parallels to that, because what you're talking about is mountains as a way that many similar folk traditions of old Europe are preserved. And it's just because they're harder to get through. So old ways die hard in a valley. And, when you're in that little valley, that's how it is. But, the feminine nature of what that is, the quote-unquote feminine nature of the extension there.
I think it's interesting when we're talking about extension of household magic to talk about doing work in other people's households. And that's certainly where my mind went in terms of the root work of African American conjure and essence of bend over, and the idea of turning the indentured servitude and slavery of cleaning someone else's parkour floors to be a means by which you laid the trick to be listened to and to get what to seek to bargain from a position of some kind of occult dominance.
I think it's interesting the parallels there in Cuba of different groups, ethnic groups, which were noted for different attitudes towards sorcery and magic and religion, and their own backgrounds and in their own cultures were, you did not want to put the Congolese in the house. The Congolese were kept in the fields because they were savage and practiced horrible sorceries. And this is, I think Ortiz talks about these things, but that the Yoruba were excellent house slaves because they come from a metropolitan culture. They understood how to be docile, woke up in the morning early by nature because the Orisha worshippers woke up before dawn to gather herbs and draw the water and things like this. So there was already they're going to be up before everyone else. The idea here, interestingly enough, of the Congolese religion is considered more aggressive in many ways than the Yoruba religions there. And similarly in its expressions in Brazil and how that goes, which is, I can't speak for the other diasporic ethnic groups, but I find that fascinating as well. Household chores here, I think the Marie Laveau side of it, right, of the hairdresser who is the witch, and what better access to personal concerns than someone who takes out your chamber pot, takes out your bloody sheets, washes your clothes, finds your hairs and your bits, and or cuts your hair.
Right. I was going over the example of the Flowers family of witches who get tried in around 1618 for the talk I did recently on the magic of cats, because there's a wonderful cursing that is done through taking the gloves of the Earl and possibly his wife and rubbing them on Rutakin the cat, this demonic familiar spirit, who is also an actual cat as far as we can tell, and this is part of the melancholy.
As all familiars should be, goddammit.
Right.
Not all cats, I'm just saying actual things.
Yeah. And crucially, the other curse that they do one to kill various children, and they do another to ensure that they'll not conceive again, and that one is done using the feathers that are taken from the mattress that they are so they are let go or they are fired, I should say, through some rumours that they may have been stealing some things, and so they complete their day and are taking personal concerns to take away. And this highlights again that sense of witchcraft being a very intimate thing, being a thing with the people that you have access to their hair and that which they sleep upon, and intimate objects of themselves and of their house.
And there you have the relationship of Martha again, right, of the patroness of household domestics,
right,
as well as the domestic chores and duties one might have, but as patroness of women's control over.
Right, and exactly. The socioeconomic factors are considerable. Yeah, of course. You're dealing with the set of anxieties around masters and servants, and around older and younger, and around male and female, and around advantaged and disadvantaged, crucially.
And the political spin of if you make Jesus your master, it's a very different thing. Or if you equate yourself as a master with Jesus, certain servants serve your master as well type of. Is that 2 Corinthians? But household magic itself, I think, is such a broad topic. Just the idea of household charms, how to guard your house against lightning and fire and death in the house. Of course, these are small subsets of everything, because we need to acknowledge the context in which these magics are done. They are not done in a temple room. This is the magic of daily life. This is the floor washes. This is the pissing on your steps to draw in customers as a prostitute. This is our business in general, and the hanging of things
over the door, next to the door, by the windows. The Indian head pennies, the mercury dimes, the things that are put in strategic places, the red thread crosses from the windows to guard against storm witches, the opening of a window when someone dies, the
the covering of mirrors in the house so that it doesn't trap them, not just in some mythical otherworld, but in your personal otherworld of the mirror, and what that is. The tending of certain areas of the house which have perhaps shrinic import of, like, if you have an area where you're commune with the dead more, but like, what is a dining room when like, don't leave that chair out. The chairs must be tucked in. You do not leave an open chair at a dining table. And every culture seems to have their versions of what these rules are, but some of them just will evolve naturally with each household of, like, we don't do that in this house. You have your ways, but you must learn the ways of the house you are in.
Shoes off.
Shoes off, shoes on. Yeah, shoes off is like, it's only because, why do you want your feet bound in little things when you're indoors or should relax? And just culturally, it's such an interesting thing.
I think you were telling me once about traditions of pouring things down drains so that they can not to get rid of them, but so they can circulate in the veins of the house.
Yes.
That you are dosing your house, or you are giving it medicine, or you are feeding it in some way.
Yeah.
I love that notion.
Drains, things that go underneath the crown molding, the base molding. That look at Grania, the deity of the hinge. This is Etruscan, so there's one of the deities associated with Kusul and Kulsans, which are the male and female psychopomps, the Hecate equivalents, but male and female. So the shears that cut the initiation cord and take the measure. So there's fate reference there, and the Morai. So each of these things in a house of, like, the top hinge has a different purpose than a bottom hinge, and what that means and how that extends, that someone who is living this worldview, not just doing magic, this is where it starts to become magical as opposed to magic. The breathing it. And so it's when someone says, what's a good spell? And you're like, I don't know. I'm just doing things, I have to still empty the chamber pot and get the linens. And, like, this is where we see a lot of practicality in the folk magic things, which was, I think, there was a certain catering to a written record of magic in the 90s in the English-speaking world that was spell books of, like, how do I get this person to fall in love with me? And those have always been in the historical record. But blessing your shotgun, making sure that your cows aren't poisoned, making sure that the cheese doesn't rot prematurely, a blessing of the rennet, a blessing of to get rid of fleas. And is it a magical spell when you are sowing wormwood into your floors? Well, it is if it's done with intent. And it's also the lack of separation between the mundane and the magical.
Right.
This is a very post-industrial revolution materialistic idea. And it's very hard to, when one is on the other side of it, it's very hard to go back to the other side. I think you can switch one way or the other, but I think it's not something that you can paradigm hop as easily. I think the meta paradigm does not exist where it necessarily contains both.
Right.
I think we're just very quiet. I'm more quiet about the things that oppose one of those things, because it's very difficult. The container, I don't think, is able to hold both.
Right.
Personally, I think it complicates it too much.
Especially when, if we're going to compare it to, the folk turn to high ceremonial stuff as the sense of you do a thing in a space and then shut the space down. Very often, the hall is opened and closed. As you've said before, the lodge is the people in it.
Yeah.
And there's also a sense that this is stuff that you do and then meditate on it and contemplate it, and it's an internal and internalizing kind of thing, rather than something that you do something about. Now, I'm sure a million lodge magicians are going to disagree with that and say, it's plenty practical stuff in terms of the organisation and the birthing of a thing from it not being done to it having been done. But I think ultimately that's very different from, strewing rosemary and wormwood around the floorboards.
The household magic ideas too of the economy of everything, and I think money is such a hard topic in the Western magical paradigms of, like, you should not have to pay for certain things. And this is something I'm sure we both come up constantly as people who divine and offer services. Well, why does it cost money to do that? And you're like, well, it's time. So, like, let's at least, that seems to be the good first out that people understand of, like, it is your time. And you have training in something and you're doing it. But there's the side of it that, like, how do you get a good temple in which to promote your ceremonial magic, people have got to pay for it. It doesn't just fall out of the sky.
Right.
If you're sticking to Second Life or the Akashic journeying, perhaps it's a easier thing. But somebody still first has to build it, and that side of those things is very difficult. Of course, this can be used for hoarding money or the cash signs of magiques. But
right. And that's arguably where the economics of what I've experienced of lodge-based ceremonial practices is in learning how to chair meetings about budgeting and that kind of thing.
And wrestling with budgeting and what that is. And this is a household magic of all, like how to make ends meet and how to, even the division of time.
But it's also predicated on the idea that you already, you might have the space already. And I think there's a bleed through of a thing that I don't want to sound like I'm allying with that sense of, grimoires were only ever worked by, rich dead white dudes, and they had no practical implication in anyone's
certainly worked by literate people
life.
Though. They certainly worked by literate people.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is its own.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and semi-literate people. Absolutely. But the idea that this is what you do when you have that there is still an assumption that someone else will be doing the washing up. You find it in certainly in the British university system. I think Oxbridge students are still forbidden from taking employment while they're studying there because it's seen as not taking your university time seriously enough. You are forbidden from earning the money to be able to do the thing. Right? You're also given such a workload that still doesn't account for the amount of time spent cooking for yourself and feeding yourself, because there's still an assumption that someone's going to do that for you. If you're in a position to do this, then you should be doing it properly, i.e. from a position of wealth and privilege and power. And I think there is a bleed through into magics that consider, who's going to clean the floor before you, appoint it with your delicate Adonais and other god names, right? That's not considered enough.
Certainly. The notion that has been explained to me by some scholars that why was it 33 was the start of the study of Kabbalah, of you had to be married, you had to have children, because by that point you had already been working since you were a young teenager, and you had children that could carry on the business for you, because you were going to stop what you were doing at 7 p.m., have someone feed you, and then study for hours each night. And if you had not set your business up, if you were not fluent in Hebrew enough, you could not gain the insight.
Right.
It was something to study later in life, which is as a practical tradition of it. You had to have someone to come and help you with food. And that notion of priesthoods that were taken care of, the donations to a priesthood that was doing that thing, because you are giving up what you could do something else, and what does it mean to be of service, which I think we are heavily colored by Judeo-Christian concepts of charitable service and sacrifice in that way. But
it works the opposite.
The Hippocratic Oath originally said no money for that too. So
universe.
Yeah, the universe will reward you.
But it's reversed, right? It's the sense that first you need to work out how we're going to pay for this, and then there's I like that sense of like, all right, you are given the time to study and now make yourself useful, as opposed to starting from the point of I'm going to learn all this stuff and then people should pay me for it.
It's still difficult, right? You have to have the opportunity, you have to have the literacy, you have to have these other things that provide, which is setting up the future generation that is within your power to be able to study. The idea that was expressed in Llewellyn's Druids, like the author Llewellyn, not the publishing company, of the Druids constantly going to villages and traveling and seeing that child is smart and has a good memory, we're taking him, like singling him out, because you needed to hunt for new people to perpetuate things forward. Right. So,
which is also what's going on with apprentice fairs. I should point out, like,
yes.
I don't want an image of Druids going around stealing children.
I mean, in some parallel societies, like, you don't get a choice when the priesthood comes sometimes.
Sure.
In order to support it. And certainly even the notion, you don't get a choice in Napoleonic succession of Western Europe, which was not always Napoleonic succession, but the idea that all the property goes to the oldest son.
Oh, right.
And some areas, it could be son or daughter, like Spain, Eastern Spain.
Primogeniture.
So that idea that you're going to inherit as the oldest child, period, and you cannot marry another oldest child because you can't take inherit two farms. Mm-hmm. So if you were the first child, you inherit. If you're the second child, you're going to marry. The third child might be able to marry, but we're not sure. And the fourth child is going to be a priest, possibly, or a nun, because you can't figure out what to do. But the fifth and sixth children, notoriously in Europe, go to the priesthood. They get sent to a convent. Hildegard was sent by her parents because she was, one of 8 or 10 children. Like, there's no more way to feed you.
Right.
So we give you to the church. So there's no choice anyway from a birth order perspective of, at a certain point in Western Europe, it became, if you were the fourth or fifth child, you went to America. Until the mercantile class came over, and then it could, anybody could go.
Right.
But a lot of people, it was this idea of I don't have opportunity here because our population has expanded. There's only so much land. We divided acres into little things.
Right. Which is the dissolution of the Carolingian fisc anyway. Is in what becomes France is exactly that in the 9th century of trying to divide up farmland into smaller and smaller regions, which is why even today the equivalent of local councils and things like that is so bizarre and full of things like rotten boroughs and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a problem. It's a tension that must be faced.
Okay, so household magic, we have the acknowledgement that the everyday is its own sacred act. The zen and the art of peeling potatoes.
Sure.
Which is one spin on it. The other side of it is to acknowledge the inherent problem solving and practicality that is magical, but not in a sense of hyperbolizing it. That things that were given routines and knowing how to do certain things in a specific house was magic. It was not like magic. It was magic. That if you know how to start the fire in that fireplace, you know how to unstick the flue. Not wasting time is a big thing. So you were trained into a household cult. The traditionally, historically, would be a woman was apprentice the older woman in the house that knew the things, and that you would want that to happen before that old woman became so invalid that she could not teach you.
And the literal trade secrets of making that particular kind of cheese.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting the household idea that it became very quick. Older farmhouses, the animals were kept in your house because you had one structure.
Right.
Eventually, they became barned. They were put somewhere else. Now, in small mountain villages, you didn't do that because you relied on those animals' warmth to heat up the other parts. Yeah. Methane's your friend. The oldest form of methane heating. But that side of it is interesting too. That the house that is the barn, the house of the animals, becomes distinctly no longer female controlled but male controlled, and women enter it to milk and do the chores in that house still. So you're still talking about not even hiring out, but that everybody goes in and participates in that. But it's still the idea of it's interesting that you lose the sanctity of one thing, and now the barn becomes the shop, the meaning the machine shop or things like that. The smithery,
right,
become male dominated as well. It's so
a place of industry.
This is not a one-time topic, is what it comes down to.
No, for sure.
But on that notion, in dealing with Caput Draconis, in dealing with household magic and Martha, I find the tower an interesting expression of all that.
Yeah.
Specifically, because when you look into the tower, yes, the Tower of Babel is often quoted as a thing there, but so is the harrowing of hell in older decks as well, because it's the pulling people out of the domain of limbo that they were put in. So the fortress from the rest of hell, there's a fortress in hell where the unevil were kept, and that is its own tower that cannot actually reach heaven.
So that's why the house of God is struck by lightning.
Yeah,
it's the house of God because it's got the good pagans.
Yeah,
right.
Adam and Eve and the Jewish patriarchs are there too, which means babies are there and everything in the second coming. And the harrowing of hell is its own wonderful topic, and that's a great feast day for us in the future on Holy Saturday. But in addition to that, Jodorowsky in his tarot book has a totally different spin, which is totally Jodorowsky, of it's the phallus of the earth ejaculating That it instantly becomes, well, tower is always this male thing, and there's the Saint Barbara references that are used in some Saint Orus correspondences and things like that. But that the Yod flames that are drawn in the Rider-Waite are or based on the Marseille of, it is literally the coming forth of the earth, the coming of the earth, which was like a, it puts this joy spin on it, like when you're reading his things behind it. But
it's not an accident.
It's not an accident. And certainly the buildup of the tower, you see the temptation there with the Babel myth, which is also helpful for the I won't get killed for this because it is public record, the pre-Hieramic myths of Freemasonry, which deal with Noachic legend and the rebuilding of society after the flood, as well as being descendants of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, which was a main piece of architecture mentioned in the Bible. So the idea that Nimrod commands a tower to be built, and it's a ziggurat of sorts, and it gets too high and it gets struck down, and therefore the confusion of language is happening after that point.
That's punishment for hubris.
Yes. Which I think retroactively echoes the original sin idea, that it's, we always talk about original sin being carnality, but it's the thing that spins off Catholic concupiscence there is about presumption, that we can do what we want, and there will be no consequences, or that will be okay no matter what. So the assumption that we have agency is the original sin. And Catholic concupiscence is different from Protestant concupiscence and even modern concupiscence, but the idea that the soul of man turns towards the dark by nature, that we serve ourselves first, that we are selfish creatures by nature, and this is something to fight against, to build the body of light, to let the Christ light in. It's like a Night Bright theme song, Christ light, something in there somewhere. So the tower for you, what stirs your thoughts?
Well, a lot of the major arcana stuff that I'm familiar with, was so long ago that it was still. I got a lot.
You were a wee young magician.
I got a lot out of working through, basic modern Hermetic Kabbalistic kind of stuff. The idea of it being strung between Netzach and Hod, the idea of the tower, that if we are running it as like grand cataclysm of attempting to logic at your feelings or attempting to feel about your thoughts, this kind of tension that emerges between those two. The idea of it being the mouth of Pe, right, is really interesting, I think, within this context. The notion of and I'm now thinking about it in terms of like the volcanic mouth that spews forth like rage, and the idea of it being the martial card is interesting to me, and the notion of the shriek of joy that splits the heavens, that kind of stuff, is fascinating. The idea of it being an eruption upwards and out rather than a reception of a thing that's built too strong and then crumbles.
That's interesting. So if you have the diametric opposition of something thrusting itself out, because if we compare it to Caput Draconis, it is fire answering it on top, so it cannot reach the heavenly fire. It cannot break through the last onion layer into the planetary spheres. It cannot go superlunar, and it's actually completed. It's in that one flash of lightning, because it is also referred to as the lightning. Or the blasted tree. There's many possibilities here. And then the blasted tree brings up burning bush things as well. But the completion of its elemental correspondence there of the earth, it's an impulse of the earth to build up. It gets past its water, it's up in the air, and then lightning completes it. But in its completion is now echoed its destruction, which is sudden violent change, which ties it into the Osa side of it. That's fun.
Which we can, that's certainly where we're at with. If Cauda is the malefics, the idea of a firm structure, of a big foundational, heavy leaden thing that is also like destroyed, that is cleaved from the earth, that is erupts in fire. That's a very malefic. It's a combination of the two malefics, and in accident, in disaster, in the tearing down, in the cataclysm.
And then you have the harrowing of hell side of it, where Jesus rends the gates asunder. So Jesus is the lightning that comes in and shatters the imprisonment of the good pagans. That's fascinating. I mean, the Tower is such an interesting card because we have this. Certainly, it would be remiss to not, as many of us were. This was our college defining moment. Was the Twin Towers collapsing and being struck, and the phallus of the city. This bifurcated tower. This was a huge thing to see those things fall. It's the Tower card, whatever that means. It's the end of something, and then to see one erected in its place is such an interesting, and how long it took and what that means, and
and the image of it as a harbinger of war.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it follows the devil, which is never easy.
And what does that Capricorni devil build? What borders does it more heavily arm and guard and impose afterwards? Yeah, that's interesting. The violence by which Big JC is shot into the underworld as well is interesting in terms of.
Well, he's raised up. He's the hanged man, right? Raised up as a tower-like thing. Yeah, it's intense. I mean, the Tower is probably one of the more easier images to understand as far as innate, the way that it's drawn of people falling out of a building, or the lightning-struck tree, and someone dealing with that, and this is your fruit tree. This is the sustenance is now being punished in some way. The stone throwers in the sky are seeing fit to punish you. So there's this concept. I mean, the card is sometimes said to bring higher learning, that there's another lesson that's coming from this. In addition to the building up, the Icarus myth side of it that is so prominent now, because the card has changed a lot. So whether it was the harrowing, or a tree, or lightning itself,
or the Hellmouth, right, which seems to be partly there in the Thoth Tarot version. Right?
The harrowing, right there, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And that brings us nicely back to the heads and breaths of dragons, and the herb that is used to sweeten the breath.
Yeah, the lightning in Spanish cartomancy is the reversed knight of coins. Is literally called the lightning, and deals with fire in a very real way. But I find it interesting because the knights are interesting figures. Their movement in some way in Spanish cartomancy, and the Knight of Cups is referred to as in old treatises as the arrival of the devil, good for good, bad for bad. And it's the foreign, the knights are often foreigners or military men, or these things that come in, and it's the thing that moves from town to town, the charismatic wanderer if you're the Knight of Clubs. And lightning itself there is coming on the back of the same card as foreigner when it's upright. So it's the person who comes in from afar. It brings an organization here. That card notion, I just find it interesting, because to have the person who comes in to help you make ends meet, or the person who comes in to help organize your project, to get new vantage on something, the same card when it's reversed becomes lightning. And that's interesting to me. And the Barbara parallel, which we've talked about when we did our Barbara stuff,
sure. In terms of being lightning struck as well as simply lightning, do you think, I mean, obviously that's you can use lightning struck wood for a variety of things, but would you say within particular cultures that you're familiar with that there is a consistent theme there, other than it being empowered by the cracking,
the fulgurized side of it?
Yeah, right. The
I'm sure if you're the one that survives it, you're lucky if you can go find where the lightning struck, as opposed to deal with the very real fact of fire coming from there, the serpents traveling between the worlds, or the great dragons of the sky, the stone throwers, the Jakuta Shango thing of punishing, and what that means, and the magnetization that happens with those rocks, and suddenly they're imbued with different power, the very real physical side of lodestone suddenly being created, and the cracking, the temporary deafness, the kind of forced seclusion that comes from being struck by lightning if you survive it, or being near it when it strikes. I just saw that video on Facebook of lightning striking a river, which makes like a whole part like explode, and then the water changes color because a whole bunch of things are coming to the surface. The dirt is stirred, and obviously the conducting side of it. A lot of things die in the water when that happens. But it was making me think with the lightning struck tree, the parallels of like the Thor trees that were killed by the church, set on fire or chopped down, and what that means, the divine side of this, and that, you know, here we have the burning bush, which is a tree that it's burning but is not consumed, whereas lightning obviously consumes.
Right.
The idea that balefire, you know, is extinguishing all fires and having something that's been started by lightning that is consistent one place, that everything's lit from that thing.
Which is part of the thing about the simplicity of, I know we've talked about candle magic before, but the simplicity of these, you know, necromantic rites involving candles being about leaving a candle burning at night. Like how fucking dangerous that is. Like in a barn or a farm environment.
You're calling on trouble.
Yeah.
I thought in the research about Christopher, just because, you know, it's his feast day today, so in the past few days I've been thinking about him a lot. But looking at the early record of novenas in early modern Iberia, always in front of tapestries, because tapestries were a really easy thing for a church to have, because if they had to move, they were portable property or could be sold, so they could live in a church for a long time and then be sold as almost relics. So
they themselves traveled,
praying to the tapestry with tapers that are left while you pray. And during this time period, the novenas become extremely long. 33 credos each night for 9 nights is a very different prayer force. And in this case, it's specifically invoking St. Christopher, but also the sacredness of 33, which is a Christ number, but and Christopher as well. But that idea of leaving a candle, so the churches are often stone or stone floored, so okay, that's fine, but many times they're wood. The idea of how do you contain it? And I think about that even with like modern churches. Like, it took me a long time as an altar server to realize that those were oil candles, because, you know, I just was accepting that you just lit the damn things. But that a high mass with more candles is more risk. High mass is 6 candle mass, and that you know, you're not just going off 2. And the idea that I think of all those 90s music videos of the romantic candles on set, but if you have more than 15 candles on a set, you need a fire marshal. And what that is as having gone to theater school and trying to light our damn flames on stage and be like, like you get like 1 or 2.
Is that why it's called 16 candles?
Oh, maybe. I think that's actually just the Sweet 16 thing, but yeah. Now I want frozen yogurt, which I can't have either. Yeah, I think playing with all of that too is so the Icarus myth of it, like flying too close to the sun and getting melting, is one form of heat, but the Cassandra side of it, of like flirting with prophecy and then not following through with the sun god, the one who shoots from afar, because Apollo is Hekatos, like you know, this idea of the far shooting arrows of the plague god, of the sun god, the god of light. Still, although Zeus might be lightning, there's still the tower is struck by this thing. It gets too close to the fiery firmament, and it falls. And is this a product of hubris? Is this a product of the natural order of things, that like you can't build indefinitely high? You cannot. Our physical environment does not support it. And even if we can build certain things, like the trauma, the technology needed to support the pressures of the physical universe, are a very different thing to like build something that goes all the way up into the atmosphere. You know, you can't be connected to the earth anymore. You have to fly up there. Which is interesting. You must let go of the earthly impulse to become the Hodorowskian penis. That's interesting. So then, the movement, the tower is by its nature still. The eruption of joy of this earth phallus, or the lightning that comes down, whether it's coming out of or going into. I find it interesting, the stability of the tower is still, it has to have a sturdy foundation in order to get up there. What I'm thinking about, though, is that the demon we picked for today is the most unstable looking sigil you will find in the Grimoire Imberum. And certainly the concept of not being able to predict her actions for the corresponding spirit, Pomba Gira, is par for the course. That the mystery of woman is never solved, and perhaps that's the male spin on the cult there of like, I know less about Klepoth because, first off, Grimoire Verum is a much more recent study for me, and it's your fault, and Jake's fault, but also that because Pomba Gira has her own prevalence for me in my life of that, like, to study something else that is similar but not. It's like trying to learn Spanish and Portuguese at the same time. But okay, so we'll make sure that sigil is on the artwork for today as it is. But can you talk? I'm going to invoke your doctorate in the history of early modern British magic and say, speaking as a passionist.
A passionist, I like that.
It's a specific lovely order that has a wonderful little Sacred Heart symbol. But, yes, passionist, magic,
Gabriel?
Yes, my namesake. But yes, he was a passionist. Devoted to the Mantra Dolorosa, specifically the Passions of Mary, so the 7 stabs of, yes. Okay, so, Klepoth.
Klepoth's interesting in terms of being regarded, certainly by the point we get to the Italian versions of what will be called the Grimoire Verum. It's also being called a variety of other things, confusingly also being called the Clavicula Solomonis. But we definitely have records of its use by Italian middling sorts, cunning folk, in the sense of also having another job usually. The tailor, who is also you go to for your your love leashes and things like that, because he's good with a tape measure, that kind of stuff. Definitely.
So is the Undertaker.
Yep, absolutely. And the sexton, and we're into girdles again, right? And the getting the measure of someone. So their yard. So Klepoth, you get coming through by the point we get to the late 1600s, early 1700s, mid 1700s, described as a spirit that spins, being her primary thing, that that she has many turns.
She's a habitrot. Sorry, she's Giras.
Right.
Of course.
And
spins. Oh, sorry. The double meaning there happened in both in the same time. Spinning, as in the act of spinning wool, or the movement of spinning the body.
Yes.
Great. Because one good turn deserves another. Okay. I
haven't encountered too much textile spinning stuff. Because the other prevalent ideas that she brings forth in terms of her offices are around gaming and gambling, are around music and the idea of turning and spinning in music. So it seems more prevalent to be a embodied thing, and certainly that's how she seems to turn up for many people, is in this spinning. She's...
Can I ask... Let me play the devil's advocate. The devil's wife's advocate. How much of these records of how she shows up, is there a record of this before the modern understanding and paralleling with Kimbanda?
Yeah.
So, what can you speak of to the older ideas of how she manifests?
So the root seems to be from the wonderful Joseph H. Peterson's most recent book on the Clavicula Salomonis de Secretis, which is one of the earliest forms, Latinate, found in Poland and a couple other places. Well, the manuscript was found in a Polish library, but seems to certainly have been used in 16th century Italy and seems to find its way around various points. The issue is the Latin choria, which can mean a chorus or even hecklers or a choir, but it can also refer to dance or circle dance, right? And I think that's the root here. So there's certainly the idea of the sounds that turn up, the tintinnabulary stuff, but also the idea of hearing sweet music as she appears, and that she can be called to do that as well, along with the idea that she's dancing, she's turning, she's spinning. And that she's there and then not there. And added to that later on, she starts to be associated with the sun more by the time we get to what we can call the Verum form, the wand that is attributed to her. Again, Verum having this role of putting spirit seals on tools, is hazel and is made in the day and hour of the sun. And certainly seems to inform this sense of her gold, but also of her coming and going, and her circling and her spinning. arguably. So she turns up looking a lot more like something. The seal is not. There are several. There's a very blocky seal that goes on the wand by the time we get to Verum. There's as you said, the one you're alluding to earlier of this, like, I'm doing this hand motion that's not going to work for a podcast, of this turning, this one.
It's
line
very
drawing.
much like what you do when you're trying to make your ink flow in a calligraphy pen.
Yeah.
In a plume.
That notion of flowing. The seal that's older for her is, to my mind, it has this quality of like a dress spinning outwards.
Looks like a bow and arrow with a bat wing instead of a normal string,
or a kind of like a jellyfish with a spear.
What's interesting with that is what I can also say is that it looks like it's a bow and arrow that is trying to echo the exact moment in time when the string is let go. So it's vibrating, releasing something forward. Although I don't know what that little Babylonian
kind of crossed vesica thing.
Cross vesica thing in the center.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
That's quite interesting. The vagitus that's there. This book looks fascinating.
Yes, and is if you're interested in Verum, if you aren't, awesome. But if you are, then really, I think this most recent translation that Peterson's done, that's titled this book, this version of it, he's titled "The Secrets of Solomon," to distinguish it from the bunch of other things that get called the Clavicular Solomon.
Well, and the subtitles is great for catching the eye too. It's like a witch's handbook for out of the Venetian Inquisition, right? That subtitle. I mean, I said of interest. It's There's certain other ones that claim to be certain famous. Not Peterson's books, but there are other books that have been published that claim to be famous people's grimoires or spell books, and it's like, well, they're contemporary,
right?
But I think even past just we're seeing such a wonderful increase in part of the study of magic that people will get to at any point that is necessary, just as the part of the study of any spirituality or religion, is that conflicting information should not dishearten you from continuing to study and dive in.
No.
It's actually a great place to try and understand what the relationship is between the two, whether it is something, was there a source that got diverted into those two concepts? Was it an error in translation? Was it a purposeful meditation that you can get out of it between those things?
And learning that this cast of characters who are a little bit distinct from the dramatis personae of the Verum has certain they pop up in other things. There are spirits there that we've discovered through the German Honorius stuff that also pop up in the Goetia of Solomon in the quote unquote 72. But they are a little bit distinct, and to find that there is an earlier record of them than these very late 17th century things kicking around Italy, that they're far earlier and spread far wider, raises an interesting set of questions, because these characters are also turning up in a variety of manuscripts anyway. It's a relative given that the grimoire spirits turn up for your particular engagement with them, that the same characters turn up with occasionally slightly different roles from manuscript to manuscript, or in slightly different configurations laterally of a general hierarchy, that that deputy might be under this chief in these variants that are, after all, the record of an individual magician and their work. And that's the point beyond which the initial stuff is the opening salvo, is the first salute, is the formal dinner to get to know them. So the idea that we could be getting at earlier sources of these same spirits is less like, oh, this renders everything that came after this redundant, and we're gonna,
which is a problem for many, right? Of that impulse is genuinely there, I think, naturally. We've talked about this before. The earlier the better means it's more accurate, because and this plays into the fall of man mythos, that it was more pure in the ancient time, blah blah blah. And in addition to that, the grand neo-pagan influence to completely dump anything learned in the last 1800 years through a Christian lens, of like, go back to the source of the Greek magical papyri, which are at a time period of such conglomeration and syncretism, both purposeful and non-purposeful, in the great melting pot, that it's ironic that it's like, well, I'm going to drop this thing because it's confusing and go back to paganismo.
Well, when, the translations of the term used to address Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael is God, is gods, crucially plural, rather than angel or angelos, which is, not necessarily a problematic term either.
Don't worry about the messenger. Go to
right. Okay. It makes a sense. So the issue is less. I've found that suddenly we can throw away our corrupted version and go back to the source text. It's more like finding out that these spirits have some older names and some older gang affiliations and respond to different signs in slightly different ways, and that's partly down to the difference between a word that ended up that later versions have translated for one spirit as stratagems that came from the same root that we get in this earlier instantiation, which is devices. And so that sense of a spirit that rules the making of mechanical things, and what does a device mean at that point, and how is it played out in terms of
device of evil?
Right. Why not?
Okay, so what makes Klepoth unique in comparison? What are the distinct characteristics of this? You usually refer to as a she, and most people do now. I have no idea if it was ever he, she, back and forth. I know different languages and non-gendered languages change these things, and certainly the church belief that every supernatural creature is ultimately male, except if it was created by God, as in Lilith and in matter form,
which flies in the face of Byzantine demonology, which definitely has space for a variety of female demons. So by the time we get to Verum, Klepoth is a she, as far as I've certainly the Alabek translations and things like that, which there aren't too many others that are even Verum is also very light on the. There's not so much of a description of he appeareth in the form of so much as there's offices, and that's usually about it. With a couple,
you know what? Somebody just needed to do the illustrated version, because everyone remembers the illustrated,
the Clancy stuff,
and that stuff isn't even matching the description half the time anyway.
No.
How was a night owl like an owl, or a raven, night raven? Excuse me,
yeah.
Like an owl. Poor Stolas.
Yeah.
But it's actually a very specific bird. Is a thing. Yes, it refers to many things, but there is a thing called a night raven.
Right.
Anyway. Putu is a very good equivalent of it.
So, by the time we get to Verum, Klepoth is referred to as a her and a she, and certainly the idea of dancing is also equated to hear sweet music, is also equated heavily with certain operations to make women dance, or make a girl dance, or get naked and then dance.
Now, can I just transpose that to make the men dance as well?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, there are plenty of examples of similar kinds of workings. I was just going through from a completely different place the Black Books of Verum, with one of those typically simple trolldom-y kind of these magic words written on a piece of paper and put under your doorstep will make all the men dance at your house party. And there's plenty of other examples of black magic dance parties. Albus, oddly enough, in the 8th is bad for a bunch of stuff, but is bad for negromancy, but unless, and this is specified by Catan and Hayden, unless it's magic to make people dance, in which case Albus is natural amiability.
All you DJs out there, there you go. That's actually an interesting idea, is just complete random, of doing a house chart of what figures you want where, like the influences of there as a talismanic thing going into an event, and like corresponding that with the because there's a lot of things I've worked with a few ideas about having the current weather that is observing now and the ideal weather, and like the tracing of the fingers, the moving of the candles along those things to try and invoke to say like we need to move it to this, following the pictorial representation of the houses, which on an old way is very grid-like, but there's this lovely kind of gear-like circular nature on a modern astrological chart.
Well, it makes the working with them as placements, the 192 placements of the 16 figures in the 12 signs is something I'm exploring at the moment more heavily, and reflecting on and writing up and exploring, because there are figures where they do change what they mean depending on the house. That like people and like spirits or the spirits that make up or that live in that figure, that they respond well to some things and badly to other things. And it's not consistent necessarily either. Conjunctio can be both very, very honest and very, very dishonest. Depending on what's going on.
But what was it? Karker in one of the houses was just like bad, very bad, very, very, very baddest. It was just like greater evil, evil of the greater evils, still bad. But that was just still amusing. Of when you were giving a lecture once, and that slide came up, and I couldn't. Bad, very bad day type of.
It's a trick. Yeah, Karker is a tricky one. Certainly a tricky one.
So the interesting part about spinning here, okay, I do obviously the distaff and the distaff line and the idea of women's work, which ties into Martha and our idea of household magic, and these topics were more picked to be in alignment than usual. But it's really kind of fun to see how they do all align. The tower was not necessarily, but it ended up tying in very heavily, especially with Caput Draconis.
And also Sarah Kali. I mean, this is the thing that I think is interesting about the earlier translations of Klepoth turning up and having this thing about silk scarves that was lost in later translations. That she turns up and she'll the one that stayed is that she's very connected to cards and to crucially what's the way it's phrased, if playing cards. If you wish to know, they can reveal in your ear the cards of the person playing with you. Right? That they'll go round the table. So there's another kind of circumambulation and tell you what other people's cards are,
which is a very powerful divination when you're playing for bets. But the idea of seeing what cards are in the hands of God are also an interesting idea of moving forward.
I can't. She and certainly I work. With that spirit heavily in terms of cartomancy.
The idea of music itself, I understand the dancing side of it, but music spins in the air. Like it turns the air, it transforms the air, and the qualities corresponding, right, of Kimbanda, of the Reino da Lira, the kingdom of the harp, of being the most Luciferian, the most Pomba and her primal element there, and to understand also that Klepoth, I don't think was the only female in this list. In this way, because you have other females listed as, or other demons listed as she, in the greater context of things. I know that in the structures of Kimbanda, when it was written about in the early 20th century, after it being labeled as such by Umbanda and moving into a public form that got merged with different candomblés and things like that through the 60s and 70s, that Pomba Gira is referred to as Eshu Pomba Gira in the older text, like she is the female Eshu, and her qualidades, her manifestations started. There were quintessential ones. You had Maria Padilla, you had the Queen, the Reina de las Ocho Encrucijadas, you had Rosa Caveira, you had these quintessential Pomba Giras, but in time she answered to the needs, or perhaps echoed the older belief that a spirit could come as male or female, based on what this was, and that the access point in the larger legions of 49 spirits, and some people argue that it is because of the mapping with the Grimoire Verum that she becomes Klepoth, and this idea that she is the female is in the larger context of these male spirits. But notice that also echoes the story of Odu that said that the 16 Odu come down and they neglect Oshun. And that there was one female to start with, and the neglecting of the woman, the misunderstanding of what is needed to enact magic, that you cannot forget the feminine powers, that maybe it's speaking to historical context, but the idea here that Eshu Pomba Gira becomes, there are as many Pomba Giras as there are Eshus, and the idea of a female demon and why it's threatening to the church. Now you have the idea that demons can be born. It's not just of feminine nature. So the idea of debating the sex of the angels, they're neither and both. But the idea of demons producing new demons is terrifying, as opposed to stealing the seed of men and producing something that's a half-breeded demon,
right.
which is not the same thing.
Yeah.
The nephilic impulse there.
Oh yeah. The terrific power of these mothers of abomination.
Yes. Oh, mothers of witches, mothers of abomination.
And crucially that, we're talking about working them as opposed to propitiating them, and what's given at certain points to keep them away.
Yeah, those Or even the propitiating of the Ajay, right? The forces, the witches that are out there, of like, stay over there. Here's the offering. This needs to just go smooth. Here with Pomba Gira, we have a sweetness, a fragrance in the air that is added to the sulfurous nature, the heat of Eshu, and the balance of what that is. And, from a very male perspective, of course, this is the ability of woman to seduce man and charm him and tame him, tame the beast, the Martha converting the Tarrasque. But there's also this thing that happens as it evolves within, especially the last 100 years or so, that these different forms of magic and schools of thought that are called Kimbanda. Pomba Gira becomes your force of sensuality. She becomes the mystery of woman. She is a direct echo of the female Orishas, and not just all female dead throughout the times. There is a heavy reliance, or let's say an informing by, and we talked about this again, the importance of theosophical literature and metaphysics in Latin America, through being the only things available to discuss these things. But the idea of archetypes becoming part of the vocabulary by the 40s and 50s, that you could talk about this spirit that was now woman. And to a man, woman is its own mystery, and then to a practical community, when the practice starts becoming communal as opposed to small family groups or traditions of Congolese-based magic or whatever the ethnic group that was practicing something that gets converged with this kind of low spiritism that was in Brazil.
We start to get the legions.
We get the legions because community has to reflect its value centers, where women are more prominent in larger African. Afrodiasporic is such a strange term. It is, because are you talking religion? Are you talking traditions? Are you talking sorceries? Are you talking
culture? Right?
Culture, is this a blanket term? What agenda is being put upon it? But when we're talking about both people and groups that are Africa descendente in Brazil, these things that are derived in part from an African or are believed to have an African inheritance, women control that sphere far more, and this is a very different take on things. So you see more Pomba Giras coming into play, and the reliance in the early 70s and 80s of codifying what these Pomba Giras, like what spirit comes, as opposed to the older model that is still actively embraced, that someone can go into a temple, be possessed by a new spirit, and that spirit gives its name and its sign, and it says, you serve me as an Eshu or you serve me as a Pomba Gira. Meaning, do I get these hot, fiery things that are Eshu, but some Eshus take more female quote-unquote offerings, or do you serve me as a Pomba Gira? Are you talking about the phallic force that inserts itself from the horizon, this black sun philosophy of the Congolese? Are you talking about the red sun that rules over the world of the living, and the pleasures and the experience and the things that get the blood flowing, not just in anger but in sensuality as well?
Yeah,
passionate, which for the indigenous ideas of soul work tend to have the individuality is part of the passionate soul. Spirit is impersonal, and we take a European lens on that too, that spirit is the breath of God. This is a different animating force than your soul, which is yours. Your soul is yours. It is your wants, desires, needs, and what you've done with it, versus the body itself, which is its own informing additional soul complex or animistic center.
Yeah. And that idea of the red and the black interacting in different ways to fulfill a thing together is so much more interesting than just variant foil editions of this spirit turns up in collectible male form and collectible female form. Right? The idea of where they play off, where it's not just
that you have the Cruzeiro. There's such a Cruzeiros can be an Eshu or Pomba Gira, and they express the Cruzeiro kingdom in a different way when it's a Pomba Gira or an Eshu, but also that she will express herself differently for someone who walks with her, that's a male devotee, priest, whatever you want to call it, sorcerer, macumbeiro, colundeiro, quimandeiro, whatever, versus a woman and what that agency is. I think about that a lot with we've had a lot of talks about what it is like to have the Orisha Eshu Elegua as a guiding Orisha, and in our personal conversations and among friends. But I think about that of like the old taboos of making women to those warriors, those forces that are so strong, and it doesn't set them up for success. And we want to say no, that's the head they chosen. But in this society, can a woman express what that is. Yes, they can, but it is an uphill battle. Here we're going to talk about easy, medium, hard on a video game type of thing, of that for a woman to have the phallic deity as her guiding thing, she will be knocked down by everybody else in society that wants to maintain that women should not have that energy. And it's an interesting thing because it was the first time I started realizing it and observing women who had elegua amor. It's very hard for them in a different way. It doesn't mean that men have it wonderfully easy, but it's still, there's a different thing there that, you know, the optics, the perceptions, the relationships there, much like we were talking about with household magic, it doesn't set it up nicely. We're not, but in order to set it up to that, we have to have more women initiated to those things and setting the way, and men being initiated to other powers and things like that too. Like the importance of in these spiritualities of having a female crown or a male crown, quote unquote,
right? And
what that does to your nature.
Yeah, and this is also feels like it puts a nail on the. That's the phrase that I'm using now. Apparently, puts a nail on one of the themes that's been running through here when we're talking about women's magic. We're talking about what is both, you know, what comes to. We're talking both an essentialist model and also a constructivist model of what are the things that women were allowed, right? As opposed to, you know, what is naturally occurring and must be present for everyone who defines themselves a woman, right? The issue is one of both the individual and their context, and how their context restricts or insists or impels,
and bordering into concepts of gender and sex and identity that are, I mean, let's take a lesson from the Tower. Like, you cannot be too stiff in these things, and that, like we were talking about, the myths themselves should be changed to reflect the current needs of a people that are telling them. What does that mean when, you know, there's the traditionalist is like, no, we have to be this certain way. You know, some questions will have to be confronted by the traditionalist lens in time when, you know, we initiate in the ATRs through, you are initiated as the gender you were born, assigned at birth, whether or not that's your current identity for yourself. And there have been people trying to figure out how to incorporate this type of thing for a long time, and I certainly don't have those answers. I can only speak to I encourage the talk about it. But the idea that just as we use your name at birth, your married name is not used when you're initiated. You know, the name that you were called, that your ancestors were announced to you, or that you were announced to them as when you were born, and that idea of letting that identity go. I think there's a way to, I don't want to just talk about it as spinning, but there's a way to explore as to what the necessity of acknowledging who you were with everything that you were, and using the initiations to heal and to grow for everybody, what that means moving forward. But we're not at, there's going to be 80 billion people, there's not 80 billion people in the world. I can't even pronounce the words apparently. But I know that this is always a heated debate and always a heated topic. It is interesting that it comes up with the Martha, the Tower, the Pomba Gira who throws the Klepoth. I'm assuming Klepoth probably has the same capacity for throwing a wrench into the otherwise ways of doing things, because dancing and moving around and music, it changes the air. It spins things on its head. And the Cassandra who is predicting the future but is not believed yet. Yeah. Believed in hindsight. Oh, damn, we should have listened to her.
Yeah.
I think...
And that notion of how... Sorry, I'm interrupting.
No.
That notion of how men and women cooperate, to not simply talk about this in terms of differences and assigned roles and things, but the cooperation and the idea of an initiation being a kind of marriage, and the marriage being something that benefits a community, and that is a space in which not only are exchanges made and a thing sworn in front of the community and an emissary of something divine, but also that there's a communal way in which it echoes out, and something in terms of the wider mirroring of a marriage between two or more, I guess, in other kinds of initiations or marriages. Has this wider mirroring out of
what even is language, Al?
of our processes of being engaged with the divine at all, right? That it's an alchemical meta model as well, And I like this in terms of, again, with the red and the black, that examples where spirits bring different skill sets and emphases and powers to each other and empower each other, not because they are two sides of the same coin, but precisely because they have their own interactions and alliances and affairs and whatnot. The one that springs to mind that's very close to my heart is Segesias and Capapreta, right? And the way in which they both are and aren't just the lady version of this and the male version of this thing, but they have their own dominions and, and
there is a Pomba Gira Capapreta, but we don't want to call her with Capapreta.
Right. And that they assist each other, and that they bring things out of the other, and help them bring their medicine to the world.
I look at the pairing of Lucifer and Maria Padilla, which is both grimoire and kimbandic. Don't be a kimbandic. But the idea of impulse and inspiration must be met with ambition in order to go anywhere. That constant insight and constant impulse does not manifest things. It's wonderful. But Maria Padilla is the one, and now we do this. The gruaching, meaning Lady Macbeth, of everything, of like, we must drive this forward. It must have a womb in order to manifest, and how do we do that? Now, he has his own deputies to do that as an issue, but his partner, his equal in the match, is Maria Padilla for a reason. And what is the relationship between Mor and Figueira of the thing that is the synthesis of everything, and the inspiration there is reversed. He has to guard that and protect it. And the king and the queen of the Seven Crossroads, it's almost flipped, because she's more of a king than he is in the sense of rulership, and he's very by personality is more laid back. And it's interesting because having seen him come down in many different lineages, he is very similar. Some of the spirits vary a lot, but he is very similar in temperament. And I think it's also interesting with all of this that we have our own ideas of what these things are, and it's wonderful to go into the intellectual extrapolation of these things, but the spirits, when they're down, are far less limiting than we are by their categorizations. If you go to an Orisha, to an Eshu, to a Pomba Gira, to someone who's doing a Kabbalistic banquet type of thing, and Baal comes down, you can ask them questions, and they're going to be very confused as to why you're putting limitations on everything. That there are much less boundaries in the magical world, and the influences, everything going back and forth, and I asked you, are we talking spinning or spinning? And you're like, yes. And this is a very resonant answer as far as how things go in these worlds of... if you are not understanding that you are writing your own grimoire when you are doing this, to pair off of my own talking, if you're not, what is animating the words you're doing, like every grimoire you are reading, you are filtering through your own vantage, and you are making your own new notes because you are filling in the blanks and changing it. And this is true of every tradition we do. So what's the responsibility of continue? If you want to see what other people are doing already, then you must go back. It keeps a common point. The words are a good reference, but all words can be reinterpreted no matter what. The little storage of power that comes with writing, the encoding of kinetic prayer that is dance, of music that changes the air, in the spirit of not neglecting our last little topic, because there's so much to go through, even with Klepoth and Pomba Gira, because spinning dove, but also Bambunjila, which is the cross, literally means crossed roads, in Kimbundu, which is an echo of Aluvaya and Mavila Mavambo, these different qualities of the energy that is found at the crossroads, the fire, the animating force, the memory of movement through an intersection that is echoed in different kingdoms in Kimbanda for sure. But the idea of you're crossing the street and you could be plowed into from the side if you're not paying attention, and what is this accident that happens, and why is this known as Eshu, or why is this known as Bambunjila, or Aluvaya, or these different names given to it. Ultimately, in the Kimbanda that we know well, those are male and female titles, and they can be orishas in other systems of Kimbanda as well that are allied to Candomblé. But the idea of the hardening of, for as Lukumi would say, osogbo, but it'd be of a bad thing into something that we can use as a tool. This is a relationship, obviously, that I like to embrace, the kind of esoteric Kimbanda that I know from our lineage, and it's not just about getting laid and smoking the cigar and and getting drunk on Friday. When a spirit's coming, you should not feel the drunk. You should not be in your tobacco space. But the idea of how do you use that venom, that torch, the thing that has the violent sudden change, the Eshu that is the child of Oya that has prepared you for these huge things in life, so that the world's not going to end, even though it literally is ending right now. Like this too will turn into something. The energy has to continue. A little bit into, bear with me here, Hagstones as the congealed venom of the most common venomous reptile in Europe, which is the adder.
Yeah,
and that. We call it a hag, which is the poisonous woman in many ways, the dried up womb, which is weather witches and things like that. But also the adder stone, that it is the collected venom or spit of serpents that is then either thrown up into the air and hardens by nature, or the druid stones that Pliny writes about.
Yes.
The storages of power that is talked about in the West Country of the little hole allows you to see into the other world.
Yep.
It cannot be man-made. It must be natural in this expression, but it is made through movement of water through a rock, and people knew that. That it is because you could go back and see the water pushing its way through. So the fluid nature there does tie it into the Klepoth movement there, that the earth itself is spinning. It's making a hole. It's boring through, which is serpentine in nature.
And something out of a river, to return to our Martha things. Yeah.
The Tarrasque.
And that it's also it's a coagulation of venom by some kind of mythic understandings of it, for sure. It is both the bane and the blessing, or the boon, right? It's the thing that allows access,
or that it's from the head of the serpent itself, which comes from, in some versions, the serpent being cast out of the garden and children being told to throw stones at it, that the stone calcifies from the wounds it receives of being shunned, that it is its own, this memory there of that it is a storage of the original, and I've even seen the comparison of the first tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that the serpent was around, that the hole in the hagstone that's the thread. The hagstone is the serpent wrapped around it. It has this memory, or that it's caused by the bite, the venom, and that the hagstone, the beauty of it is that it's the venom that is passed through, meaning that there's a way for the venom to pass through the person, that they're not going to die from it.
Yeah. And certainly plenty of traditions of collecting dew and putting dew through it, a way of that you've created a door, an open door.
The dew shall make a door.
A dragon's head that you can pass it through, a dragon's eye as well. That and that you can collect those tears, and that works a thing that you see into the other realm. So it has that piercing quality. It doesn't rend the veil so much as gives you a little peephole. And
the concept of an egg being the potential for new life of the thing. So if it's called an adder's egg or a serpent's egg, what is its potential? What is it possibly birthing?
Yeah.
And it's used to store witch power. Witch power and witch power.
I like its use. I use one with the whole thing about having a cord attached to it and then wrapping it around the hand and holding it in dream to dream through. And it feels again like a version of the several stones in beds for dreaming, right? A lot of them are putting it under a pillow, and that whole thing that we've talked about a couple times before of a lot of dream incubation stuff is about making an uncomfortable night's sleep, so that you're rising and falling out of different states of sleep and dream and hypnagogic and hypnagogic states.
The stone is pierced by the antler of a deer. Like the idea that the hagstone is connected to dream is always lovely, but the horn and ivory parallel that goes into it. So this is just based on ivory being related to false.
Which one's which?
Horn is true dream. Ivory is false dream. But it's a Greek play on words. But ultimately that carries out, and that the idea that the hagstone is connected to dream for some people in I would say I don't think I've seen it earlier than like the 19th century references, but the idea that the stone has been pierced by the horn of dream to help make it true. And that because ivory going into that would shatter. Ivory going into a rock, but somehow the magical deer, the stag of 7 tines makes it all better. But the idea too of when some of us we don't tie a hagstone onto a string unless it's being bound permanently. So if you're wearing one, it's a slip knot. It's something that's not a true, so that it could come off of it at any time. Recently running into Julia of Oculta, who lives in Catalonia at the Verdis Gina Symposium. It was lovely comparing Pyrenean traditional elements to that and realizing that we were both wearing hagstones the same way. Certain number of knots that are tied in them. It was like, okay, so nothing's quite as isolated because it is the same damn mountain range that I know well. But the wearing of a hagstone to bind it permanently is a different thing than to be able to loosen it. What is a hagstone? It's movement through this world, the ability to see through into the invisible world, to see through the holes in the cloth of reality in that way. The belief of the keyhole, it's a portable keyhole, and that you cannot look into a hagstone for too long because something will come and poke you in the eye, which can blind you, which may give prophecy, but the idea of breathing in through the hagstone and what are you breathing in from the other world, and can you use this like a little portable Dwat converter, Egyptian-wise, of can I reach into this thing and pull it out? The relationship to harvest time and the what that means at the end, the successful interaction with the world around you. But there are a few modern traditional craft groups, and I'm being very distinct there, that associate the hagstone with Lammas and going into the dark time of the year, preparing for that. So is it taking what you need from the other world and going into it? Is it capturing the light and going into the darkness with it? Is it the kind of pan-European mythology of serpents stealing the sun, going into it, and the eggs, and stealing their eggs, and using their eggs to make sure that you're going into the darkness with knowing we're going to conquer. So what's the relationship there to the trees of midsummer that are burned in St. John's Eve, and the hairy serpents, the hairy stars, the wandering stars, and the trails that go there?
I think the hairy stars gives me pause in terms of very practical. A stone with a hole allows you to tie it, allows you to suspend it, allows it to be kept in the air, and that tension between a rock that is brought aloft, but is
and it contains the air, it's holding the air, it's making it. Was it Menantol, the giant wheel stone, the Cornish site where it's like a phallic rock and a large stone that you can pass through. The idea of being given fertility by the earth because there's something you can pass through. It always ties back to fertility, but what does that mean?
Right.
On one very level, obviously, just babies. But the idea that there's a belief that the Irish lore about them might be dealing with eels because there's no serpents there anymore, or perhaps there never were. Does that mean there's a brazen eel in Irish early interpretations of Christianity? Because that could be fun. Yeah,
that'd be great. Certainly, eels present plenty of bizarre practices of
fish serpent Tarrasques.
of gathering and being like a swarm, and particular eel species that go back to the same spot. Species-wise, and that are going there to breed, but also will go over there despite the changing rivers, and will kind of give each other a boost in this writhing mass of things.
There was a
coming up
great documentary on Netflix dealing with eels, but it was showing that we haven't researched them nearly as much as we have many other creatures, but that at least the ones they were examining here, that were all the ones that were going up into French Canada and upstate northeastern United States, were all breeding in the ocean and were microscopic and making their way back up to the rivers. So they were all of two waters. And the serpent, the dragon, the lore of what that is, but the river going back to the ocean, and the ocean becoming a river, and the relationship there. And my own obsession with the Hudson of it flowing back and forth because it's a tidal estuary, but the Hudson flows north for 6 hours and then south for 6 hours, constantly back and forth. But I have my own fascinations with eels there and the rivers that are serpents and what they are. I think there's hagstones themselves. The anointing with your own saliva to counteract the venom of the adder is a common belief. The idea that they are intrinsically feminine by nature and are used by many people in the traditional craft community to represent the feminine, the portal to the other world, but as well as the echoing the vagina itself and its portal to the other world inside of a woman. The use of it to represent the dead craft mothers in that way, in addition to specific hag-like goddesses of the land, or old witches, the black anises, and the mother Shiptons of the world. I think all that is fascinating. The Russian, I know, connects them to the chicken god, which is its own thing, because I know that in a lot of alpine lore, not just Alps, but mountainous regions of Europe, hagstones are often considered are parts of charms that are used with chicken dung, which I find a very interesting thing, because chickens, again, evoke the St. Peter thing of the crying of the sun through the rooster, and there is this thing of light and serpents, things all mixing in what it is.
Do we get the same ideas in Russian chicken lore about them scratching up the earth and about being protective in that sense? Or
I don't know enough.
Yeah,
I don't. I know that the stones were related to the domovoi are the household spirits, and that there's something to the wives of the domovoi are in the field in the yard.
Okay. The
domestic their wives are where the chickens roam.
Right.
So might they protect the sanctity of the house through uncovering things? I mean, I am sure anybody who is familiar with chickens knows they scratch up and upturn things, so a little convergent evolution in mythology is going to happen. But I have to ask Katie. Is a good person to ask.
As an egg, it's worth pointing out as well that they are protective and also hung to protect cattle and protect from lightning as well, specifically.
There are people that clean off with them too, or use them to temporarily wrap a cord through. That cord can be used. Somebody's clothes pass through it if it's a large one. Using it as the handle for an aspergillum, so that is permanent.
Oh, I've certainly heard of the big ones that people you can put a whole person through from head.
And its relationship to the cutting of a tree, which is very done it's done in the Pyrenees, done in the Alps, and done in the Black Forest of literally cutting a tree so that there's a vagitus and pulling someone through it in that way, or tying two tree branches up.
Right, making a circle with the branches, and a lot of that in trolldom.
But all of that hagstones have a huge lore, and plus, it's definitely one of the stones that's on the chalkboard in the Wickerman when he goes to the school, which is always good. Prevents the...
Yeah, there's other Mayday stuff about them, right? Am I making that up?
I'm sure.
That they... In Wales, there's a notion of them being created by that Congress of Snakes thing, but that this is meant to occur particularly, or is especially auspicious if you find one around May Eve.
Everything's auspicious if it's around May Eve.
It's true.
The vagina is opening of the earth. I don't just mean it's not like they're on clockwork. Although tegus are on clockwork, I found out that many tegu owners, in talking to Troy, their tegus all they go to sleep at different times, but they all wake up around the same time of the year. It's like they're on some weird northern and southern hemisphere. They don't care. They come up from hibernation.
Internal.
Somewhere within a few weeks of each other. It's well, mine went to sleep in October, mine went to sleep in September, mine went to sleep in late November, and somewhere around mid-March they're did your tegu just wake up? Yes. That's fascinating to me.
Talking to each other.
Yeah, they're dreaming the dream of Cthulhu.
They're Tegu dream space.
Yeah, but no one will believe them. Yeah,
No.
Even if they could talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think in the interest of sound compression, if nothing else, we can I wind it up. But do you have any new insights between all these things tying together?
Gosh, I mean, there's been we knew this was going to be an episode celebrating the feminine and women's magics and saints and demons. So it's been great to frame that and for what can look like, there's the one that the girl one demon, right? That this is the addressing a tokenism, and that we have so many dead magicians when we started thinking about wider women who were kind of witchy but not, especially opening up mythically. So it's been a good one.
Yeah, I would certainly use the on-air social pressure of seeing if we can get your wife and some of our good friends to give their perspective. I really do want to include others in the conversation. It's worth speaking just because it's immediately after the time we did it, but we recently did a night of folk necromancy, which the lectures are available on YouTube and on the website under the episode listings, and it was Al and myself and the lovely Mallory, who is Al has the unique privilege of being married to, and there's this wonderful thing of I enjoy both of you so much, and there, but I'm done. I'm tired, Al, and I can't do vegetarianism anymore. He tries to poison me with his heavy cream. No, it is so important and refreshing to be around people that, yes, are excited about the same things you're excited about, but also offer. They're like, I think you're wrong about this because here's what my thoughts are, and I think it's important to increase the difference of opinions in magic. I think the default that I see in the Liber AF magical lens, of which I'm limited to my quote-unquote friends and acquaintances and other things that I see, but it's to believe that when someone says something that they think that it's the only way, and to condemn them for it. And I can use Jake as an example of someone who I thought from reading him was proposing one thing one way, and like you talk to him in person and he'll be like, "Oh, argue with me, let's go, I'll buy the first round, I'll buy the first 2 rounds and argue, let's go." And I really the way that we do this too is we try not to reveal to each other our own research and what we find interesting on these topics, because otherwise we'll blow our wad. You can't squeeze cum back in the penis, which is a variant on what Sister Patrice in 8th grade told me, which is you can't squeeze toothpaste back in the tube. But I can try.
You think that's what she meant?
I do think that's exactly what she meant. She also told me gray hair didn't run in our family, and that's why she was obviously older and had perfectly brown hair, all of a uniform color. Definitely not from a box. Sister Patrice, I saw through that. But a wonderful teacher in many other ways. She still taught me a lot from that. But I look forward to increasing the conversation with others who think very differently from us, and the lecture we did, the Night of Folk Necromancy, got a few wonderful reachings out on the Facebook that were like, I don't agree with you, but I'm really glad you said these things, and like, let's keep talking, and that type of thing I think is wonderful. Just the community formed by the uniting of the Tarrasque and the Martha is really important. The maintenance of our own education and vantage merged with the new Tarrasques that come down from the hills, and how do we incorporate this even when it's the repulsion and rejection are as valuable as attraction and magnetism in that way.
Oh yeah, and that insight has to be married with the ambition to actually want to say it, which itself has to be leashed from being like, I am the dragon of everything that is right, and I hoard all of the truth gold.
You are the headless dragon because you are a Caput Draconis. The head of the dragon, and it's got nothing there. Also, it's just referring to the Draco constellation, the circumpolar star, the Hagstone that Draco is around the North Star and the little bears. But
we've talked about when headlessness implies only a head implies headlessness, not just as it must be somewhere, but that must be what it's referring to, which is categorically not the case. With the dragon's tail isn't just its tail; it's everything that isn't the head.
Yes.
So that's the headless stuff.
Well, interestingly, if the head evokes headlessness by its nature, then what is the decapitated body and the bromos of the world that had their heads on their bellies? But it's interesting the side of it. If I think on the Coatlicue side or the Chinamastica side. So Coatlicue, the Aztec serpent skirt is her name, but the earth energy that she is beheaded and she is depicted with serpents of blood that form her new head on the statue, that she is this giant earth monster that's netted with with serpents as a skirt, which is the waves of energy over the earth, but also the Chinamastica, which is emanation 6, right, of the Mahavidyas, of her servants are starving, and so they're in a famine in a desert, and the only thing she can do is to chop off her own head. So the streams of blood, she holds her own head in her hand, it's nourishing it, and her two servants are now saved by the blood flowing out. So there's 3 streams, which is in that the headlessness of those figures nourishes the whole world. Their head has blown up, the tower has, the earth has indeed ejaculated into the skies. It has now become headless in the way that the head is now big, and we invoke it's all in your head, but we don't know how big your head is. Thank you, Ducat, for that axiom. But that's interesting with all of this, that what is household magic? Everything. What is violent sudden change? It's everyday's occurrences of the not knowing.
Waking up.
Yeah, we convince ourselves. Waking up, exactly. The breathing, the violent changes of an in-breath followed by an out-breath, and what that means, and what do we do when we hold it. Tarragon adds a little sweetness, but I still think that relationship with Cempasúchil and Yautli, of the flower of the dead, the spice of the dead, how can we give a mild flavor to these things and erase the stench of death, which was a big thing for the raising of Lazarus, and the stench. He had already begun to decay in the desert heat, and you should have been here, and then to say, oh yeah, okay, let's not worry, and how, but now that I've done this thing again, more empires to conquer, but going into the passion of our own limitations and death, and to fulfill what we are here to do, that Martha fulfills what she is doing by wrestling the Tarrasque and becoming the saint of the unheard class, the servants and the women who are at home and underestimated, as well as those people who adore Martha's relationship to the dead and the witnessing of the light in darkness. Hagstones, and turning those children, throwing stones at your head, and passing through and containing the fairy realm in a little tiny ring. Yeah. Like a fairy ring of mushrooms. That's fascinating.
And the ring of spinning around, the ring of the table of those with cards at play.
The lazy Susan that becomes the feast of Pomba Gira. The spinning dove.
Which themselves traces the circumference of the tower that crumbles into itself. Whether or not it's received something.
The navel of the earth, the omphalos that that erupts and collapses. And the ring of fire that the sun creates by its movement. Yeah. The gold of that, what that is. All that is fascinating. The ring of truth that Cassandra presents you, the nugget that is a rock, and you are able to pass through the center of it because you don't even notice it's fascinating. Yeah. So
a gristle of meaning that can be chewed on but never quite taken apart, that passes through.
Especially when you're a vegetarian now. It's very difficult. I don't know what gristle you're getting normally. You prefer yours in the human stock of... Never mind. That's going... My apologies, Mal. But yeah, so praise and homage to the glorious Saint Martha in all of her manifestations. Martha la Buena, Martha la Mala, Martha the Dominator, to Klepoth, to Pomba Gira, to the Tarrasque, to the upside-down torch of Martha, to the adder's eggs and the adder's stones, and the chicken deities, little friends, and
the eggs laid by hags,
and that's a whole other we're coming Black Annis and a Rick, though, believe me, and the headlessness of the dragon that evokes its head. Now we are under the influence of its head because it no longer contains it for us. We're all under it now,
and the pearls that spill from its mouth.
But I am your daughter. And
and the householders.
The householders,
and those who held other houses.
The house of the world. Ileaye, the house of life, the world of life. And as we go, the breath exchange. So may your breathing be excited, and may buffaloes carry you into sweet little dreams of eel-laid hag babies.
May you be believed when you awaken.
Oh, yes. Yes. May you believe yourself, if nothing else. Don't become a Cassandra to yourself.
Oh.
Cassandra to the world, but never Cassandra to yourself is better than... Yeah. So with that, a happy feast day, a happy end of July to you, if that is when you are hearing this, and look forward to seeing what things come for the next episode. And please write us, fight with us, contest things, point out errors, point out differences in thought.
Sure, yeah.
Don't be an ass about it. You know, but you can be an asp, but not an ass.
Yeah. Or at least be funny about it.
And come join. First round's on Al.
Apparently so.
Okay, and some big announcements coming soon. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. Taste tuned. And let the Golgothite banner fly. All right, Golgoths. Peace.
Take care, everyone.